Blood. That's what Jackson Miller saw first when he opened his cabin door at dawn, a dark crimson trail leading across his weathered porch. His coffee mug shattered on the wooden planks, hot liquid splashing his boots as his breath caught in his throat. There, impossibly, knelt a massive black bear, her fur matted with blood, eyes streaming with what could only be described as tears. Martha from the general store would later swear she heard a man's scream echo through the valley that morning, though Jackson would deny it was him. In the bear's gentle jaws hung a cub, limp as a rag doll, its small chest barely moving, the same size Emma's stuffed bear had been, the one he'd buried in her empty casket. "Dear God," Jackson whispered, his military training evaporating like morning mist. Could he save this cub when he couldn't save his own child? And why had this wild creature sought him out, of all people? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Adirondack Mountains had been Jackson Miller's refuge for 3 years now, ever since the accident. His cabin sat nestled between ancient pines, far enough from the small town of Riverdale that he could go weeks without seeing another human being. That was precisely what he wanted. At 54, Jackson's face had weathered like the mountains themselves, deep lines framed eyes that had seen too much. First in his 20 years as an Army veterinarian in combat zones, then in the rearview mirror of his truck the night everything changed. His once dark hair was now predominantly gray, kept short out of military habit rather than style. His hands, though calloused from chopping wood and repairing his cabin, still possessed the surgeon's steadiness that had once saved countless service animals in Afghanistan. The cabin itself reflected its owner, functional, weathered, and holding together despite evident damage. The porch sagged slightly on one side. Several window panes had been patched rather than replaced. Inside, Jackson kept things neat but sparse. A desk cluttered with half-finished manuscript pages, bookshelves filled with veterinary texts and wilderness guides, and walls conspicuously bare except for one framed photograph he couldn't bring himself to put away. 3 years ago, Jackson had been driving his daughter Emma home from her swim meet. The roads were wet. A truck crossed the center line. Jackson survived. Emma didn't. At least, that's what he told everyone. The truth was more complicated, more painful, a reality he couldn't face even in his darkest drinking nights. After the funeral, he'd resigned his position at the veterinary hospital, sold their suburban home, and retreated to this cabin he'd inherited from his grandfather. Here, he attempted to write a book about his experiences treating military animals, a project that remained perpetually unfinished. His pension covered most necessities, though the stack of overdue notices from the bank suggested even that security was tenuous. Most mornings followed the same routine: coffee at dawn, splitting wood, working on his manuscript, walking the forest trails, more writing, whiskey, sleep. Occasionally, Martha Wilkins from the general store would drop by with supplies and gossip, despite his clear preference for solitude. She was pushing 80, but moved with the energy of someone 20 years younger, her concern for the poor widower evident despite Jackson's attempts to discourage her visits. But routine and isolation had done nothing to heal the wound inside him. Each morning, he woke to the same hollow feeling. A man who had failed at the one thing that mattered most. Until today, when a bleeding bear and her dying cub had appeared on his doorstep, somehow changing everything. For several heartbeats, Jackson stood frozen in the doorway, his military training warring with common sense. Every wildlife guide warned against approaching injured bears, especially mothers with cubs. Yet something in the bear's posture, the way she deliberately placed the cub on his porch and backed away, struck him as deliberate, almost human. "Easy now," Jackson whispered, slowly crouching. The mother bear made no aggressive move, just watched with those eerily intelligent eyes still streaming with moisture. Jackson's veterinarian instincts took over as he assessed the cub from a distance. Severe blood loss, labored breathing, probable shock. Without intervention, the cub wouldn't survive the hour. His decision came without conscious thought. "I'll try to help," he said aloud, though whether he was speaking to the bear or himself wasn't clear. With exaggerated slowness, Jackson inched forward until he was close enough to touch the cub. The mother bear huffed sharply but remained in place, her eyes never leaving his. The cub was male, perhaps 4 months old, and dangerously cold. As Jackson gently lifted him, he spotted the wound, not a bite mark as he'd initially assumed, but a clean entry hole just behind the shoulder. "Gunshot," he muttered. Who would shoot a bear cub? Inside, Jackson transformed his kitchen table into a makeshift examination area, laying out the supplies he still kept from his veterinary days. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, establishing an IV line, cleaning the wound, checking for exit points. The bullet had passed through, missing vital organs by mere centimeters. A lucky bear, if the blood loss hadn't been so severe. Through the window he could see the mother bear still waiting, her massive body tense yet restrained. Most wild animals would have either fled or attacked by now. This behavior was unprecedented in his experience. As he worked, Jackson's phone rang. He ignored it until the 4th call when he finally snatched it up without checking the caller. "What?" he snapped, pressing the phone between ear and shoulder while administering antibiotics to the unconscious cub. "Jackson, it's Martha. Just checking if you need anything from town today." Her voice carried the familiar cheerful tone that usually irritated him. "Martha, I can't talk right now. I've got a situation." "What kind of situation? You sound strange." Jackson hesitated, then decided truth was simpler than lies. "A bear cub. Shot. The mother brought it to my porch." The silence that followed lasted so long he thought she'd hung up. Finally, Martha's voice returned, subdued. "The mother bear brought her cub to you?" "Yes." "And she's still there?" "Outside. Watching." Another long pause. "Jackson Miller, in my 78 years, I've never heard such a thing. But if anyone around here could help that cub, it's you." "What do you need?" Jackson felt unexpected gratitude at her lack of questions or warnings. "Electrolytes, antibiotics if you can get them. And Martha, don't tell anyone yet." "Who would believe me?" She chuckled. "I'll be there in an hour. Don't get yourself mauled before I arrive." The cub stirred briefly as Jackson bandaged the wound, tiny paws twitching, a soft whimper escaping. "Hang on, little guy," he murmured, surprised by the emotion thickening his voice. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to care this much about anything. Outside, clouds gathered over the mountains as the morning advanced. Jackson prepared a mixture of glucose water and used a dropper to place tiny amounts in the cub's mouth, encouraged when its tongue moved slightly in response. The mother bear had settled into a sitting position, periodically rising to pace before returning to her vigil. By the time Martha's ancient pickup rattled up the dirt driveway, Jackson had stabilized the cub and moved him to a nest of blankets near the wood stove. The old woman didn't bother knocking, pushing through the door with a paper bag clutched to her chest, her white hair escaping from its usual bun. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, catching sight of the cub. Then her eyes darted to the window. "And that's Mama out there? Just waiting?" Jackson nodded, taking the bag. "Thanks for this, and for not bringing the sheriff." Martha snorted. "Tom's too busy with those hikers from New York to worry about a bear. Though if what you're saying is true, about her bringing the cub to you, that's something folks will talk about." "Let them talk," Jackson muttered, examining the supplies she'd brought. "I'm more concerned about who shot him. Hunting season's months away, and cubs are off limits anyway." Martha's weathered face darkened. "Might be that Blackwood fellow." New to the area, staying at the old Ferguson cabin, fancy hunting gear, asking questions about bear sightings. She moved closer to the cub, her expression softening. Poor little thing. What are his chances? 50-50, if we're lucky. Blood loss is severe, and he's young. Martha studied Jackson's face with the directness of someone who'd known him since childhood. You know what you're risking, don't you? Department of Wildlife finds out you've got a bear cub, they'll take him. And maybe your veterinary license too, retired or not. I know. And if that mama decides you're a threat? Jackson glanced out the window. She won't. Such certainty, Martha said, shaking her head. Almost like you two know each other. Jackson didn't respond, but his mind flashed briefly to an incident 7 years earlier, a bear cub caught in an illegal trap, its mother nowhere in sight. He'd freed it, treated its leg, and released it with a small tracking collar. The researchers had reported the collar stopped transmitting after 2 years, the bear presumed dead. But what if— I should get back, Martha said, interrupting his thoughts. Margaret Sullivan was in the store this morning talking about reporting strange noises from your property to the sheriff. That woman needs a hobby besides binoculars. Thanks for the warning. Martha paused at the door. Jackson, I haven't seen you this present since before the accident. Whatever happens with this bear, remember that. She slipped out before he could respond, carefully skirting the area where the mother bear watched. Alone again, Jackson checked the cub's vital signs, slightly stronger but still critical. Outside, clouds had darkened, promising afternoon rain. As if sensing his attention, the mother bear rose and approached the porch, stopping just short of the steps. She made a soft, huffing sound, her gaze intensely focused on the cabin. He's alive, Jackson said through the window, feeling foolish for talking to a wild animal, yet compelled to offer reassurance. I'm doing everything I can. To his astonishment, the bear settled onto her haunches, as if accepting his words. For the first time in 3 years, Jackson felt something crack in his carefully constructed emotional armor. This wild creature's trust was as unearned as it was unexplainable, and somehow more valuable because of it. The afternoon stretched into evening as Jackson maintained his vigil over the bear cub. Rain began to patter against the cabin's metal roof, creating a soothing rhythm that contrasted with the tension in his shoulders. Every 30 minutes he checked the cub's vitals, adjusted the makeshift IV, and cleaned the wound. The bleeding had stopped, but the little one's breathing remained shallow, his temperature below normal. Come on, fighter, Jackson murmured, gently stroking the cub's dark fur. Your mama's waiting. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the mountains as Jackson heated some broth on the wood stove. He hadn't eaten all day, his own needs forgotten in the intensity of care. As he sipped the warm liquid, his gaze kept returning to the photograph on the mantel. Emma at 10, laughing on a tire swing, her dark hair catching sunlight. The frame was worn from handling, the glass smudged where his fingers had traced her face countless times. The sharp knock at his door startled him so badly he nearly dropped his mug. Setting it down with shaking hands, Jackson moved to the window first, relieved to see Martha's pickup still parked outside. But beside it was an official green truck with the Department of Wildlife logo emblazoned on its side. Damn it, he muttered, glancing at the cub. Moving quickly, he covered the small form with a blanket and opened the door just enough to block the view inside. Sheriff Tom Bradley stood on the porch, rain darkening his uniform, his weathered face set in its usual impassive expression. Beside him was a man Jackson didn't recognize, younger, clean-shaven, in a wildlife department jacket. "Evening, Jackson," the sheriff said, no warmth in his greeting. "This here's Harold Jenkins, regional director with wildlife. We need to talk." Jackson remained in the doorway. "What about?" "We've received reports of a bear on your property," Jenkins said, stepping forward. "Potentially injured. As you know, any injured wildlife needs to be reported immediately to the department." "Is that so?" Jackson kept his voice neutral. Sheriff Bradley sighed. "Look, Jackson, Margaret Sullivan called it in. Says she saw you bringing a bear cub into your house this morning. That true?" "Margaret should mind her own business." "That's not an answer," Jenkins pressed. "Mr. Miller, harboring protected wildlife without proper authorization is a serious offense. If you're treating an injured bear, we need to take custody immediately." Jackson felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. "There's no law against a bear wandering onto my property." "But there are laws about interfering with wildlife," Jenkins countered. "I need to come in and see for myself." Jackson stood his ground. "You got a warrant?" The sheriff and wildlife officer exchanged glances. "Don't make this difficult," Bradley warned. "You know I can get one." "Then get one," Jackson replied evenly. "Until then, I'm not inviting you in." Jenkins's face reddened. "Mr. Miller, that bear cub could be carrying diseases. It needs professional care in a proper facility." "I was a veterinarian for 20 years, Jackson said. "Army trained. I think that qualifies as professional." "Military veterinary experience doesn't authorize you to—" "Tom," Jackson interrupted, addressing the sheriff directly, "you know me. Have I ever given you trouble?" Bradley's expression softened slightly. "No, but that's not the point, Jackson. Wildlife has protocols." "Give me 48 hours, Jackson said, lowering his voice. "The cub's in critical condition. Moving him now might kill him." "That's not how this works," Jenkins began, but the sheriff raised a hand. "What's special about this case, Jackson?" Bradley asked. "You've never broken regulations before?" Jackson hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "The mother bear brought him to me. She's still out there, waiting. I've never seen anything like it." Jenkins scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Bears don't—" "Where is she now?" Bradley interrupted, scanning the tree line. "Last I saw, behind those pines," Jackson pointed. "She's been keeping her distance but hasn't left." As if summoned by their conversation, the mother bear emerged from the forest edge, visible even through the rain. All three men froze as she ambled to the edge of the clearing, sat on her haunches, and stared directly at them. "Well, I'll be damned," Bradley whispered. Jenkins' skepticism visibly wavered. "That doesn't change protocol." Bradley turned to the wildlife officer. "Harold, use your judgment here. Jackson's got experience. The mother is clearly still invested. Moving that cub now could create a dangerous situation for everyone." After a tense silence, Jenkins nodded reluctantly. 48 hours, Miller. "Then we evaluate and most likely relocate both bears to the rehabilitation center in Albany. And I'm stopping by tomorrow to check on the cub's condition." "Fair enough," Jackson agreed. As the men returned to their vehicles, the mother bear retreated back into the forest. Jackson closed the door, exhaling slowly. He had bought some time, but the clock was now officially ticking. The cub stirred when Jackson returned to check on him, one eye opening briefly before closing again. "You've caused quite a stir, little guy," Jackson told him softly. "Half the county's going to be talking about you by morning." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the cabin. Jackson added wood to the stove and settled into the armchair beside the cub's makeshift bed. For the first time in years, he felt fully present, his senses heightened, his purpose clear. The familiar numbness had receded, replaced by something both uncomfortable and necessary: connection. As night deepened, Jackson dozed fitfully, waking at the slightest sound from the cub. Around midnight, a vehicle's headlights swept across his windows, then disappeared. Curious, he moved to look outside. Through the rain, he could make out a truck parked at the forest edge, its lights now extinguished. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then a figure emerged, carrying what appeared to be a rifle. Jackson's military instincts flared. Whoever this was, they weren't from wildlife or law enforcement. They would have approached directly. He thought about calling the sheriff but hesitated. Bradley had already stretched regulations for him once today. The figure advanced toward the tree line, then stopped, seeming to scan the forest. Jackson watched as the person set up what looked like a hunting blind just within the tree cover. After several minutes, they disappeared inside. "Hunter," Jackson muttered, though hunting season was months away. A sick feeling settled in his stomach as he connected the dots. The shot cub, a mysterious hunter, the unusual behavior of the mother bear. Someone was specifically targeting these bears. A soft whimpering drew his attention back to the cub, who had begun to shiver despite the warmth from the stove. Jackson knelt beside him, concerned to find his temperature dropping. The next hours would be critical. The cub was entering a dangerous phase where his body might give up the fight. Throughout the night, Jackson battled to keep the cub stable, administering more fluids, keeping him warm, monitoring his breathing. By dawn, exhaustion had settled deep in Jackson's bones, but the cub had stabilized somewhat. Outside, the rain had stopped and mist rose from the damp earth. The hunter's blind remained at the forest edge, though there was no movement visible. Jackson was preparing another dose of antibiotics when his phone rang. Martha's name flashed on the screen. "How's our patient?" she asked without preamble. "Touch and go," Jackson replied. "But he made it through the night." "Good. Listen, there's talk in town. Wildlife department's involved now, and there's a rumor someone's been asking about bears in the area, specifically a mother with a distinctive white patch on her chest." Jackson froze. "White patch?" "Yes. Does that mean something to you?" Jackson moved to the window, scanning for the mother bear. She had returned to her spot near the porch, and from this angle he could clearly see the irregular white marking on her chest that he hadn't noticed before. "7 years ago," he said slowly, "I freed a bear cub from a trap up on Black Ridge. Female, with a white chest patch. Tagged her before release." "You think it's the same bear?" Martha's voice held wonder. "It would explain why she came to me," Jackson said, the realization settling over him. "Bears have remarkable memory, especially for those who help or harm them." "Well, whoever's asking knows about that marking," Martha warned, "and they don't seem like researchers to me. Be careful, Jackson. I'm coming by later with more supplies." After hanging up, Jackson returned to the cub, his mind racing. If this was indeed the same bear he had saved years ago, then her seeking him out specifically made more sense. But it also meant someone might be targeting her deliberately, someone who knew about the distinctive marking. The cub stirred again, more purposefully this time. Both eyes opened, focusing on Jackson with surprising clarity. A small pink tongue emerged, licking dry, black lips. "Hello there," Jackson said softly. "Welcome back." The cub made a weak sound, somewhere between a whimper and a growl. Encouraged, Jackson prepared a mixture of glucose water and honey, which the cub lapped weakly from a shallow dish. It wasn't much, but it was the first voluntary eating since his arrival, a significant improvement. A shadow passed by the window, and Jackson looked up to see the mother bear had approached the porch again, her nose testing the air. When their eyes met through the glass, Jackson felt that same strange connection, an understanding that defied explanation. "He's doing better," Jackson told her, feeling less foolish now for speaking directly to the bear. "Eating a little." The mother bear huffed softly, then settled onto the porch itself, closer to the cabin than she'd ventured before. Her trust was a tangible thing, a weight of responsibility Jackson hadn't felt in years. As morning light strengthened, Jackson caught movement at the forest edge. The hunter had emerged from the blind and was watching the cabin through binoculars. Even at this distance, something about his deliberate movement sent a chill through Jackson. This wasn't just any hunter. This was someone with a purpose, someone dangerous. The protective instinct that surged through Jackson surprised him with its intensity. These bears had chosen him, trusted him, and for the first time since losing Emma, Jackson Miller found himself willing to fight for something again. By mid-morning, the cub's condition had improved enough for Jackson to feel cautiously optimistic. The little bear had taken more honey water and even attempted to stand, though his legs wobbled like a newborn fawn's before he collapsed back into his blanket nest. Jackson had named him Charlie in his mind. Though he tried not to say it aloud, naming meant attachment, and attachment would only make the inevitable separation harder. Outside, the mother bear alternated between resting on the porch and patrolling the perimeter of the clearing. Each time she completed her circuit, she paused to stare toward the spot where the hunting blind had been established. She knew the hunter was there, Jackson realized. Her instincts were sharper than his. The soft crunch of tires on the gravel driveway announced a visitor. Jackson tensed, expecting the wildlife department's return, but it was Martha's familiar pickup that appeared through the trees. She wasn't alone. A slender woman with copper-colored hair pulled into a practical braid sat in the passenger seat, her expression visible even at a distance. Professional skepticism. "Brought reinforcements," Martha announced as she bustled through the door, carrying 2 canvas bags. "This is Dr. Eliza Sorensen, runs the veterinary clinic over in Millbrook." The younger woman extended her hand, her grip firm. "Mr. Miller, Martha says you were a military vet, Afghanistan?" "Among other places," Jackson replied, surprised by the unexpected help. "I didn't ask for a consult." "No, but your patient did," Dr. Sorensen said, moving past him to where the cub lay. "Black bear, approximately 4 months old, gunshot wound, significant blood loss." Martha filled me in. She knelt beside the cub, her movements efficient as she began a professional examination. Jackson shot Martha a questioning look. The older woman shrugged. "We need someone with active credentials if wildlife decides to make trouble. Eliza treats large animals and has worked with the rehabilitation center before." Dr. Sorensen glanced up. "Your field treatment is impressive. Military training shows." She continued her examination, speaking in the clipped tones of someone thinking aloud. "Wound clean, good placement of drainage, appropriate antibiotics. He's responding well, considering." "Will he make it?" Martha asked, voicing the question Jackson couldn't bring himself to ask. "If he continues improving at this rate, his chances are good." Dr. Sorensen stood, brushing fur from her jeans. "But he'll need specialized care soon. The rehab center has the facilities." "He's not going anywhere yet," Jackson interrupted. Dr. Sorensen raised an eyebrow. "The wildlife department might disagree. They've given me 48 hours. We're using all of it." "Martha mentioned something else, Doctor," Sorensen said, her tone softening slightly. "About the mother bear bringing him to you specifically?" Jackson nodded toward the window. The 3 adults moved to look outside, where the mother bear sat watching the cabin, her massive form unnaturally still. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Sorensen admitted. "Bears don't seek human help. It goes against every survival instinct." "Unless she knew him," Martha said. "Jackson thinks she might be a cub he helped years ago." Dr. Sorensen's professional detachment slipped for a moment. "That's, remarkable if true. Bears do have exceptional memory, especially for threats, but positive associations." She shook her head. "It would be unprecedented." "There's something else," Jackson said, deciding to trust these women with his suspicions. "Someone's been watching the property. Hunter in a blind at the tree line. I think he's the one who shot the cub." Dr. Sorensen frowned. "Bear hunting season doesn't open for months," Exactly. Martha moved to the kitchen and began unpacking her bags. I brought food. When's the last time you ate properly, Jackson? He couldn't remember. The day had become a blur of checking vital signs, administering medications, and watching for the hunter's return. While Martha prepared sandwiches, Dr. Sorensen helped Jackson change the cub's bandages and administer another round of antibiotics. "You could have a future in wildlife medicine," she commented, observing his technique. "I had enough of medicine," Jackson replied. "Too many losses." She studied him for a moment. "Martha mentioned you lost your daughter. I'm sorry." Jackson nodded stiffly, uncomfortable with her directness. Dr. Sorensen seemed to sense his withdrawal and changed the subject. "The mother bear's behavior is fascinating from a research perspective. Her level of trust suggests previous positive human interaction." "Or desperation," Jackson countered. "Perhaps both." Dr. Sorensen accepted a sandwich from Martha. "I should report this to my colleagues at the Wildlife Research Station. They might—" "No," Jackson said sharply. "No researchers. Not yet." Dr. Sorensen looked surprised, then thoughtful. "You're protecting them." "Someone specifically targeted them," Jackson explained. "The hunter at the tree line was watching with binoculars, and according to Martha, someone's been asking about a mother bear with a white chest patch, exactly like her marking." "Trophy hunter," Dr. Sorensen suggested grimly. "Or something personal," Martha added, settling into a chair by the wood stove. "You said you tagged that bear cub years ago? Maybe someone has a grudge." The conversation paused as the cub woke, making soft, grunting noises. Jackson offered more honey water, which the little bear lapped eagerly, his strength visibly returning. "His recovery rate is remarkable," Dr. Sorensen observed. "Young animals can be surprisingly resilient if given proper care." A sharp knock at the door startled them all. Jackson moved to the window first. Harold Jenkins from Wildlife stood on the porch, looking impatient. The mother bear had retreated to the edge of the clearing, but remained visible. "The 48 hours isn't up yet," Jackson said as he opened the door. "I'm here to check on the cub's condition, as agreed," Jenkins replied stiffly. His expression changed to surprise when he spotted Dr. Sorensen. "Doctor, I didn't expect to find you here." "Professional courtesy," she replied smoothly. "Mr. Miller requested a consultation." Jenkins entered, his gaze immediately finding the cub. "It's alive, then. Good. I've brought transfer documents." "We'll move it to the rehabilitation center tomorrow morning." "He's not stable enough for transport," Dr. Sorensen countered before Jackson could speak. "In my professional opinion, moving him now would compromise his recovery." Jenkins frowned. "With all due respect, Doctor, that's not your decision. This is a wildlife department matter." "And I'm the veterinarian of record," she replied firmly. "Unless you'd like to explain to your superiors why you overrode medical recommendations and endangered a protected species." The standoff lasted several tense moments before Jenkins relented. "Fine. Additional 48 hours for stabilization. But that's it." He glanced around the cabin. "This isn't a suitable environment for wildlife rehabilitation." After Jenkins left, Jackson turned to Dr. Sorensen with newfound respect. "Thank you," she shrugged. "It's my professional opinion. The cub is doing well here, and the mother's presence likely reduces his stress." She gathered her things. "I'll stop by tomorrow to check on him again. And, Mr. Miller, be careful about that hunter. People who target bear cubs rarely have ethical boundaries." When the women had gone, Jackson sat beside the cub, who had fallen asleep again after eating. Progress, but still a long road ahead. Outside, clouds gathered once more, promising afternoon showers. The mother bear had returned to the porch, seemingly unbothered by the earlier visitors. As Jackson watched her through the window, a flash of memory surfaced. 7 years earlier, freeing a frightened cub from a cruel leg-hold trap on Black Ridge Mountain. The cub had bitten him in terror before realizing he was helping, then stared at him with unmistakable intelligence as he treated her wound and attached the small research collar. Before releasing her, he'd spoken softly. "Stay safe out there, little one. Humans aren't all bad." Could this massive bear really be that same cub? The coincidence seemed impossible, yet the evidence was compelling. The distinctive white chest patch, her unusual behavior, her specific choice to seek him out. The sharp ring of his phone interrupted his thoughts. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. "Miller?" he answered curtly. "Mr. Miller?" The voice was male, cultured, with an undercurrent of something cold. "I understand you're harboring an injured bear cub." Jackson's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "Raymond Blackwood. I own property adjacent to the National Forest. I've been tracking a particular bear, a female with a white chest marking. I believe she may have brought her cub to you." The hairs on Jackson's neck rose. This must be the hunter from the blind. "What's your interest in these bears, Mr. Blackwood?" A pause. "Scientific." "I'm a researcher." "Researchers don't usually hunt from blinds with rifles," Jackson replied, his voice hardening. Another pause, longer this time. "You're observant, Mr. Miller. Let me be direct. That bear destroyed something precious to me. I've been tracking her for years. The cub was collateral damage, an unfortunate necessity to draw her in." Anger surged through Jackson. "You deliberately shot the cub?" "I need that bear, Mr. Miller. The cub was merely a means to an end." Blackwood's voice remained unnervingly calm. "I'm prepared to compensate you generously for looking the other way when I complete my hunt." "Go to hell," Jackson growled, ending the call. He stood for several moments, phone clutched in his hand, fury and disbelief warring within him. Who would deliberately shoot a cub to draw in its mother? The calculated cruelty of it was staggering. A soft whimper from the cub pulled him back to the present. The little bear had awakened and was struggling to sit up, dark eyes alert and curious. For the first time, Jackson saw a real chance at survival in those eyes, a fighting spirit that refused to be extinguished. "You've got more heart than most humans I know," Jackson told him, gently helping him adjust position. "Your mom picked the right door to knock on." As if understanding his words, the cub made a small chuffing sound, then attempted to lick Jackson's hand, a gesture of trust that hit him with unexpected emotional force. Jackson found himself thinking of Emma, of her absolute trust in him, a trust he'd failed to honor. The familiar wave of grief rose, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Resolve. This time he wouldn't fail. Outside, thunder rumbled as rain began to fall again. The mother bear remained on the porch, seemingly unbothered by the weather, her gaze alternating between the cabin and the surrounding forest. She was standing guard, Jackson realized, protecting her cub, and perhaps him as well, from the threat she sensed lurking in the trees. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm of care and vigilance. The cub continued to improve, taking more food and staying awake for longer periods. By evening, he had even attempted a few wobbly steps across the blankets before exhaustion reclaimed him. Each small victory felt disproportionately significant to Jackson, as if the cub's recovery was somehow linked to his own. As darkness fell, Jackson checked the forest edge with binoculars. The hunting blind remained, but there was no sign of Blackwood himself. The knowledge that the man was out there, watching and waiting, added a layer of tension to the air. Jackson retrieved his shotgun from the cabinet where it had remained untouched for years, checking it methodically before placing it near the door. That night, as rain pattered against the roof, Jackson dreamed of Emma for the first time in months. Not the recurring nightmare of the accident, but Emma as she had been in life, laughing, curious, full of questions about the world. In the dream, she sat beside the bear cub, her small hand resting on its head, both of them looking at Jackson with the same trusting expression. He woke before dawn, the dream still vivid, to find the cub watching him from his blanket nest, alert and seemingly stronger. Outside, the mother bear remained at her post, a dark silhouette against the lightening sky, and at the forest edge, barely visible in the pre-dawn light, a figure moved. Raymond Blackwood, preparing for his hunt. The 48-hour reprieve was halfway gone. Time was running out, not just for the cub's treatment, but for Jackson to protect these bears from a man determined to destroy them. As he checked the cub's bandages and prepared more food, Jackson felt a clarity of purpose he hadn't experienced since his military days. These bears had chosen him, trusted him when they had every reason to fear humans. He would not betray that trust. The morning mail delivery brought another bank notice, final warning before foreclosure proceedings. Jackson tossed it aside without opening it. Financial ruin seemed trivial compared to the life and death struggle playing out on his property. Martha arrived mid-morning with fresh supplies and news from town. "Sheriff's looking for Raymond Blackwood," she reported, settling at the kitchen table. "Turns out he doesn't have permits for hunting on protected land. And there's more. He's been asking questions about you specifically, Jackson. Not just the bears." Jackson frowned. "Me? Why?" "That's what Tom's trying to figure out." Martha watched as the cub attempted to climb onto the couch, his strength visibly returning. "My goodness, he's doing well. You've worked a miracle." "Dr. Sorensen deserves the credit," Jackson deflected, uncomfortable with praise. Martha fixed him with her penetrating gaze. "You know what I see, Jackson Miller? I see a man coming back to life alongside that bear cub. For 3 years you've been as good as dead hiding away up here. Now look at you fighting for something again." Jackson had no response to her insight. The truth of her words settled uncomfortably in his chest. "There's something else," Martha continued, her tone gentler. "Town's divided about these bears. Some folks think they should be left alone, others want them relocated. Margaret Sullivan's been running her mouth about dangerous wildlife attracting more bears to the area." "And what do you think?" Jackson asked. Martha smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "I think God sometimes sends help in the strangest packages. Sometimes it's a church community bringing casseroles after a funeral. Sometimes it's a bear knocking on your door." Her words stayed with Jackson long after she'd gone. The idea that these bears might be helping him as much as he was helping them seemed absurd on the surface, yet rang with emotional truth. For the first time in years, he felt fully present, engaged with life rather than merely enduring it. The cub continued to improve throughout the day, eating heartily and exploring the cabin with increasing confidence. Jackson found himself talking to the little bear constantly, explaining his actions, commenting on the weather, even sharing stories about his military service. The one-sided conversations filled the cabin with a warmth that had been absent for too long. Late in the afternoon, as storm clouds gathered again, Dr. Sorensen returned to check on her patient. Her professional demeanor couldn't quite hide her amazement at the cub's progress. "I've never seen such rapid recovery," she admitted, watching the cub attempt to climb the bookshelf. "You have a gift, Mr. Miller." "Jackson," he corrected, surprising himself with the invitation to familiarity. "Eliza," she replied with a small smile. "Your bear cub is almost ready for the next phase of recovery. The question is whether wildlife will let you continue care or insist on transfer to the rehabilitation center." "He's not my bear cub," Jackson said automatically, "and his mother might have something to say about separation." Eliza moved to the window, observing the mother bear who had maintained her vigilant watch. "Her devotion is extraordinary." Bears are excellent mothers, but this level of trust in a human, it challenges everything we understand about wild animal behavior. As they watched, the mother bear suddenly rose, facing the forest edge with her fur bristling. A low growl carried through the air, audible even inside the cabin. "Something's wrong," Jackson said, reaching for his binoculars. Scanning the tree line, he spotted movement. Raymond Blackwood, rifle in hand, advancing slowly toward the clearing. "Is that the hunter you mentioned?" Eliza asked, tension evident in her voice. "Raymond Blackwood." He deliberately shot the cub to lure the mother. Jackson set down the binoculars, his decision immediate. "Stay with the cub." "What are you going to do?" Alarm colored Eliza's question. Jackson checked his shotgun. "Make sure he doesn't finish what he started." "Jackson, wait, this is a matter for the sheriff." "No time." He moved to the door, pausing only briefly. "If anything happens, get the cub to safety. The mother will follow." Outside, the air hung heavy with the promise of rain. The mother bear had positioned herself between the cabin and the approaching hunter, her massive body tense with protective fury. Jackson advanced across the clearing, shotgun held visibly but pointed downward. "That's far enough, Blackwood," he called when within earshot. The man stopped, rifle still in hand but not yet raised. Up close, Raymond Blackwood was younger than his voice had suggested, perhaps late 30s, with the lean build of someone accustomed to the outdoors. His expression remained neutral, almost academic in its detachment. "Mr. Miller, I'd hoped we could reach an understanding." "There's nothing to understand," Jackson replied. "You shot a bear cub. That's illegal and despicable." Blackwood's gaze shifted to the mother bear, who watched them both, huffing loudly, clearly agitated. "That bear killed my brother, Mr. Miller, 7 years ago on Black Ridge Mountain." The revelation hit Jackson like a physical blow. "What?" "My brother James was a wildlife researcher. He was tracking several bears, including a female cub he'd recently tagged." Blackwood's voice remained eerily calm. "He was found mauled to death. The evidence suggested the cub's mother attacked him while he was handling her young." 7 years ago. Black Ridge Mountain. The timing matched Jackson's rescue of the trapped cub. "Your brother was setting illegal traps," Jackson said, the pieces falling into place. "I found one of his cubs caught in a leg-hold trap. Was he studying them or planning to sell them?" A flicker of emotion crossed Blackwood's face. "James had financial troubles. The Asian market pays generously for certain bear products, but his methods don't justify his death." "So you've spent years hunting the bear you believe killed him?" Jackson kept his voice level, aware of the mother bear watching them both. "Justice, Mr. Miller. Something the law couldn't provide." Blackwood adjusted his grip on the rifle. "Now, I'll ask once more. Step aside." Jackson raised his shotgun slightly. "Not happening." Thunder rolled overhead as the two men faced each other, neither willing to back down. The mother bear growled again, a deep rumble of warning. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier. "You'd risk your life for a wild animal?" Blackwood asked, genuine puzzlement in his tone. "She came to me for help," Jackson replied. "She trusted me when she had every reason to fear humans. I won't betray that trust." Something in Blackwood's expression hardened. "Noble, but misguided. That bear is still a killer." "So are humans," Jackson countered. "More deliberate in our cruelty, too." The standoff continued as rain soaked them both. Behind Jackson, the cabin door opened and Eliza's voice called out, "Jackson! Sheriff's coming up the drive!" The momentary distraction was all Blackwood needed. He raised his rifle in one fluid motion, aiming not at Jackson but at the mother bear. Jackson reacted instinctively, firing a warning shot into the air. The mother bear roared, the sound primal and terrifying as she charged toward Blackwood. "No!" Jackson shouted. unsure whether he was addressing the bear or the hunter. Everything happened at once. Blackwood firing, the bear lunging, Jackson moving forward. Then Sheriff Bradley's voice cut through the chaos, amplified by a megaphone. "Drop your weapons now!" In the confusion that followed, Jackson found himself on the ground, rain pelting his face, the mother bear standing over him protectively. Blackwood lay several yards away, his rifle knocked from his hands, Sheriff Bradley and 2 deputies approaching with weapons drawn. "Don't shoot the bear!" Jackson called out, struggling to his feet. "She was protecting me!" To everyone's astonishment, the mother bear backed away slowly, returning to her position near the cabin where Eliza stood in the doorway, the curious cub visible behind her legs. Sheriff Bradley reached Jackson first. "You hurt?" "I'm fine." Jackson surveyed the scene, relief washing over him as he realized no one, human or bear, appeared seriously injured. Blackwood was hunting illegally. "He admitted to shooting the cub deliberately." The sheriff nodded grimly. "We've been building a case against him. Multiple reports of illegal hunting, harassment." He watched as his deputies handcuffed Blackwood. "You're lucky that bear didn't tear you apart, Jackson." "She knows I'm helping her cub," Jackson replied simply. Bradley shook his head in disbelief. "In 30 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything like this. A bear protecting a human? Martha wasn't exaggerating for once." As the sheriff led Blackwood to the patrol car, the hunter called back over his shoulder, his composure finally cracking. "That bear is still dangerous, Miller. You're a fool to trust a wild animal." Jackson watched them drive away, rain plastering his clothes to his skin, an odd sense of peace settling over him despite the chaos. When he turned back toward the cabin, he found the mother bear watching him, her dark eyes reflecting an intelligence that defied simple classification as wild animal. "Thank you," he said quietly, unsure if he was being foolish for addressing her directly. But as she huffed softly and ambled back to the porch, he couldn't shake the feeling that she had understood. Inside, Eliza had wrapped the cub in a fresh blanket. The little bear squirmed excitedly at Jackson's return, attempting to climb toward him. "You're both soaking wet," Eliza observed, her professional tone belied by the concern in her eyes. "What happened out there?" "Justice, I think," Jackson replied, kneeling to let the cub sniff his hand. "Or something close to it." As night fell, the storm passed, leaving behind the fresh scent of rain-washed earth. The mother bear remained on the porch, seemingly content now that the threat had been removed. Inside, the cub slept peacefully, his recovery progressing remarkably. And for the first time in 3 years, Jackson Miller fell asleep without reaching for the whiskey bottle, the weight of failure temporarily lifted from his shoulders. Dawn broke clear and crisp after the storm, sunlight filtering through the pines surrounding Jackson's cabin. He woke to unfamiliar sounds, soft huffing and scratching coming from the living room. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't place them. Then memory rushed back. The bear cub. Jackson found the little one fully awake and exploring, pulling books from the lower shelves with newfound strength. The transformation from the barely breathing bundle of the previous morning was remarkable. Though still favoring his injured side, the cub moved with increasing confidence, curiosity overcoming caution. "Easy there, bibliophile," Jackson murmured, gently redirecting the cub from a particularly valuable veterinary text. "Some of those are first editions." Outside, the mother bear had maintained her vigil through the night. She rose when Jackson appeared at the window, approaching to press her nose against the glass, dark eyes searching for her cub. Jackson held the little one up so she could see him, feeling foolish yet moved by the visible relief in her posture. The shotgun altercation with Blackwood had changed something fundamental in the dynamics between them. The mother bear had protected Jackson, a human, from another human. Such behavior defied every wildlife expert's understanding of bear behavior. It wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. Jackson's phone rang as he was preparing breakfast for himself and a mash of honey, berries, and protein supplement for the cub. Sheriff Bradley's gruff voice came through without preamble. "Thought you'd want to know. Blackwood's being charged with multiple violations: illegal hunting, discharging a firearm near a residence, animal cruelty. He's not getting out anytime soon." "Good," Jackson replied, watching the cub devour his breakfast with messy enthusiasm. "There's more," Bradley continued. "We searched his cabin, found journals, photographs. He's been obsessed with this bear for years, the one with the white chest patch. Called her the Widowmaker. Had detailed maps of her movements, notes on her habits." "What about his claim that she killed his brother?" A heavy sigh came through the line. "That part checks out. James Blackwood was found dead 7 years ago, mauled by a bear, but the full report suggests he was setting illegal traps, possibly harvesting bear parts for the black market. Rangers found 3 dead cubs when they investigated, no mother in sight." Jackson's gaze drifted to the mother bear outside. "He was killing her cubs. Looks that way. If it's the same bear, she had reason to attack." There was a pause. "Jenkins from Wildlife will be there at noon. 48 hours are up." After hanging up, Jackson sat heavily in his armchair, the implications settling over him. The mother bear hadn't just randomly sought human help. She had specifically sought him, the human who had saved her as a cub when her own offspring were being slaughtered. The depth of memory and calculation such behavior would require was staggering. The cub wobbled over to him, leaving sticky honey paw prints on the floor. Without thinking, Jackson lifted him onto his lap, smiling as the little one sniffed curiously at his beard. "You're a miracle, you know that?" he told the cub softly. "Both of you." A vehicle approaching drew his attention back to the present. It wasn't noon yet, too early for Jenkins. Through the window, he recognized Eliza's SUV pulling alongside Martha's pickup. The women had arrived together again, this time with what appeared to be camera equipment. "Documentary evidence," Eliza explained when Jackson opened the door, holding up a professional-grade camera. "If we're going to convince Wildlife to consider alternatives to the rehabilitation center, we need to document the cub's recovery and the mother's unusual behavior." Martha bustled past them both, arms full of groceries. "And I brought breakfast for humans. You look like you haven't eaten a proper meal in days, Jackson Miller." While Martha prepared food in the kitchen, Eliza set up her camera, capturing footage of the cub's movements and the mother bear's watchful presence outside. Her clinical detachment occasionally gave way to genuine wonder. "The implications for bear behavior research are enormous," she said, lowering her camera after filming the mother bear responding to Jackson's voice. "She recognizes you specifically. Watch how her ears change position when you speak versus when I do." Jackson hadn't noticed that detail. The mother bear's ears perked forward when he spoke, tilted sideways when Eliza or Martha spoke. Another piece of evidence supporting the incredible theory that this was indeed the same bear he had rescued years ago and that she remembered him. "What are you hoping to achieve with this footage?" Jackson asked as they sat at the kitchen table, eating Martha's hearty breakfast casserole. "Best case scenario? Convince Jenkins to allow in situ rehabilitation," Eliza replied. "Let the cub recover here, under professional supervision, with the mother present. It would be a groundbreaking approach." "And worst case?" Jackson pressed. Eliza exchanged glances with Martha. "Worst case, they take the cub today. But the footage might still help establish protocols for keeping mother bears involved in rehabilitation when possible." Jackson nodded, surprised by the hollow feeling that spread through his chest at the thought of the cub being taken away. In just 2 days, the little bear had somehow burrowed beneath defenses that had withstood 3 years of well-meaning human intervention. "There's something else," Martha said. Her usual directness softened with unusual hesitation. "The community's talking, Jackson, about you, about the bears. Word's gotten out about what happened with Blackwood." And? Jackson wasn't sure he wanted to hear public opinion on his actions. "And people are taking sides. Some think you're a hero for protecting the bears. Others think you've lost your mind." Martha patted his hand. "But the important thing is, they're talking about you as a person again, not just that recluse who lost his daughter." Her words struck with unexpected force. For 3 years, Jackson had defined himself solely through his loss, the father who failed to protect his child. Now, suddenly, he was being seen through a different lens, the man who protected the bears. The cub, perhaps sensing the emotional shift in the room, chose that moment to attempt climbing onto the table, sending a mug crashing to the floor. The sound startled him so badly he scrambled backwards, tumbling into Jackson's lap with a frightened whimper. "It's all right," Jackson soothed automatically, one hand gently stroking the cub's head. "Just a mug. Nothing to fear." The casual tenderness of the moment wasn't lost on either woman. Martha's eyes glistened suspiciously while Eliza quietly raised her camera, capturing the interaction. "Jenkins isn't going to like this level of habituation," Eliza warned softly. "I know," Jackson acknowledged. "But he's a bear, not a pet. He'll return to wild behaviors once he's back with his mother." The conversation paused as the cub, recovering from his fright, began investigating Jackson's beard with curious pause. The simple joy of the moment was so unexpected, so at odds with the grief that had defined Jackson's existence for years, that he found himself laughing, a rusty, unpracticed sound that seemed to surprise even him. Martha beamed. "Now there's a sound I haven't heard in too long." Their moment of lightness was interrupted by the distinctive rumble of an official vehicle. Jenkins had arrived early, accompanied by 2 Wildlife Department technicians in a large transport van. The mother bear, who had been dozing in the morning sun, immediately rose to full alert, huffing loudly. "Here we go," Eliza murmured, gathering her camera equipment. "Let me do the talking initially. Professional to professional." Jenkins looked distinctly uncomfortable as he approached the cabin, eyeing the mother bear warily. She had positioned herself directly between the wildlife officials and the porch, her massive body tense with protective intent. "Dr. Sorensen," he greeted Eliza stiffly when she opened the door. "I wasn't expecting to find you here again." "I've been documenting the cub's recovery," she replied smoothly. "It's a remarkable case study." Jenkins frowned. "Nevertheless, the 48 hours have elapsed. We're here to transport the cub to the rehabilitation facility as agreed." "Before you make that decision," Eliza said, "I'd like to show you some footage that might change your approach." For the next 15 minutes, they gathered around Eliza's camera display as she showed carefully selected clips: the cub's remarkable recovery, the mother bear's protective behavior toward Jackson, the clear communication between mother and cub through the window. "This case presents a unique opportunity," Eliza concluded. "The mother is unusually tolerant of human proximity, specifically Mr. Miller's. We have reason to believe she may be a bear he rescued years ago." Jenkins looked skeptical. "That's a fascinating theory, Doctor, but it doesn't change department protocol. Cubs requiring medical intervention must be rehabilitated in approved facilities." "What if we made this an approved facility?" Jackson suggested, the idea forming as he spoke. "Temporary approval under Dr. Sorensen's supervision. The cub continues recovery here with his mother nearby, then both are released together once he's fully healed." Jenkins shook his head. "Impossible. This cabin doesn't meet any of our standards for wildlife rehabilitation." "It could," Martha interjected. "The community would help. Tom Whitaker's a contractor. He could build whatever enclosure you need. Sarah Jensen has medical supplies from her late husband's veterinary practice. People want to help, Mr. Jenkins." The wildlife official seemed taken aback by Martha's certainty. "This isn't a community project, Mrs. Wilkins. These are wild animals, not strays for the local shelter." "With respect," Eliza said firmly, "this case is unprecedented. The mother bear's behavior defies everything we understand about bear-human interactions. Separating them now could negate a valuable research opportunity and potentially traumatize both animals unnecessarily." Jenkins looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between protocol and the compelling case before him. His gaze shifted to where the cub now slept in a patch of sunlight, his breathing strong and even, recovery evident in every line of his small body. "I'll need to consult with the regional director," he finally said. "This is beyond my authority alone." "How long will that take?" Jackson asked. "I can reach him by phone now, but I make no promises." While Jenkins stepped outside to make his call, the atmosphere in the cabin grew tense. The cub, sensing the shift, woke and moved to press against Jackson's leg, a gesture of trust that tightened something in Jackson's chest. The idea of watching this little creature being loaded into a transport cage had become suddenly, inexplicably unbearable. Martha placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "One step at a time, Jackson. We've made our case." When Jenkins returned, his expression was unreadable. "The director has conditionally approved a 2-week trial period for on-site rehabilitation, provided certain requirements are met." The relief that flooded through Jackson was so intense it left him momentarily speechless. Eliza immediately stepped forward. "What requirements?" "A proper outdoor enclosure meeting department specifications, regular veterinary documentation, limited human contact to prevent habituation, and—" Jenkins hesitated. "The mother bear must be tagged and fitted with a tracking collar for research purposes." Jackson frowned. "She won't allow that." "Then there's no agreement," Jenkins replied flatly. "The director is only considering this unprecedented arrangement because of the research potential. The collar is non-negotiable." Eliza looked thoughtful. She might accept it from Jackson. If she truly is the same bear he rescued years ago, and if she trusts him, as the evidence suggests. "Are you proposing that Mr. Miller, a civilian, approach and collar a wild black bear?" Jenkins asked incredulously. "I've done it before," Jackson said quietly. "7 years ago, with the cub I rescued. If this is the same bear, she might remember the process." Jenkins looked from Jackson to the mother bear outside, who continued her patient vigil. "This is highly irregular, against all protocols." "This entire situation is beyond protocol," Eliza pointed out. "We're in uncharted territory." After further discussion and several more phone calls, a tentative plan emerged. The Wildlife Department would provide a tranquilizer gun as a precaution, but Jackson would attempt to approach the mother bear directly, establishing whether her trust extended to allowing him to place a tracking collar. Meanwhile, community volunteers would construct an outdoor recovery enclosure meeting department specifications. "If, and only if, we successfully collar the mother and build the enclosure, the cub can remain here for rehabilitation," Jenkins summarized. 2 weeks maximum, then both bears will be relocated to a less populated area of the forest. As the wildlife officials left to retrieve the necessary equipment, Martha squeezed Jackson's hand. "I'll start making calls. We'll have half the town here by evening to build that enclosure." Left alone with Eliza, Jackson felt the weight of what he'd agreed to attempt. Approaching a wild bear, even one that had shown unusual trust, carried significant risk. "Do you really think she'll allow it?" he asked Eliza, watching the mother bear through the window. "I think if any bear in history would allow a human to collar her, it's this one," Eliza replied. "But Jackson, be careful. Trust has limits, even extraordinary trust like this." The cub had fallen asleep again, his small body curled against Jackson's boot. Looking down at him, Jackson felt the familiar weight of responsibility. But this time it wasn't crushing. It was purposeful. Jenkins returned within the hour, bringing the tracking collar, tranquilizer gun, and a team of wildlife technicians who would document the unprecedented attempt. Word had spread quickly through Martha's efforts. Vehicles began arriving carrying lumber, tools, and volunteers eager to help construct the enclosure. The mother bear watched the increasing activity with visible apprehension, retreating to the edge of the clearing, but never fully disappearing into the forest. Her dedication to remaining near her cub, despite the growing human presence, only strengthened Jackson's resolve. "We should wait until the crowd thins," he told Jenkins, as the enclosure construction began at the side of the cabin. "Too many people will make her nervous." Jenkins nodded reluctantly. "Daylight's burning, Miller. If this doesn't work, we take the cub today as planned." As the afternoon progressed, the enclosure took shape with surprising speed. The community's response had exceeded even Martha's expectations. Over 20 people worked in coordinated effort, following the Wildlife Department's specifications. Among them, Jackson recognized faces he hadn't seen in years. Neighbors who had given up trying to engage with him after months of rebuffed invitations and ignored casseroles. Eliza stayed close to the cub, monitoring his condition while Jackson prepared himself mentally for the approaching challenge. The tracking collar felt heavy in his hands, a modern, lightweight design but still a burden to place on a wild creature. By late afternoon, the enclosure was nearly complete, a spacious area adjacent to the cabin, with climbing structures, shelter, and secure fencing that would allow the cub to recover outdoors while preventing escape or intrusion. As the volunteers began dispersing, offering words of encouragement to Jackson, the moment of truth approached. "It's time," Jenkins said, checking his watch. "We've got about 2 hours of good light left." Jackson nodded, his mouth dry. He had changed into the clothing he wore for forest hikes, familiar scents that the mother bear might recognize. In his pocket he carried honey, a peace offering and distraction. "The tranquilizer gun is ready if needed," Jenkins reminded him, handing the weapon to one of his technicians. "One wrong move from that bear and we'd dart her." "No heroics, Miller." "She won't hurt me," Jackson said with more confidence than he felt. Eliza touched his arm lightly. "Remember, slow movements, no direct eye contact, speak softly. If she shows any signs of stress, huffing, pawing the ground, popping her jaw, back away immediately." With the small crowd watching from a safe distance, Jackson began his approach. The mother bear had settled at the forest edge, about 50 yards from the cabin. She rose as he walked toward her, head low but alert, watching his every move. "Hey there," Jackson called softly when he was about 30 yards away. "Remember me? I helped you once before." The bear huffed, shifting her weight from paw to paw, not aggressively, but warily. Jackson stopped, giving her time to assess him. When she neither retreated nor displayed threat behaviors, he took another few steps forward. "I need to put this collar on you," he continued in the same calm tone, holding up the device. "It's the only way they'll let your cub stay here with you." 20 yards now. Close enough to see the individual hairs of her fur ruffling in the breeze, to note the scars on her muzzle that told stories of a hard life in the wild. Close enough for her to kill him with one swipe if she chose. The bear rose onto her hind legs, a posture that elicited gasps from the watching crowd. At her full height, she towered over Jackson, nearly 8 feet tall, powerful and majestic. He forced himself to remain still, though every instinct screamed at him to run. She dropped back to all fours and, to everyone's astonishment, took a step toward Jackson. Then another, closing the distance herself. "That's it," he encouraged softly. "You know I won't hurt you." When just 10 feet separated them, the bear stopped. Jackson slowly reached into his pocket and extracted the honey container, opening it and placing it on the ground between them. The familiar scent caused her nose to twitch visibly. "A peace offering," he explained, taking a small step closer as she investigated the honey, "just like last time." The collective breath of every observer seemed held as Jackson closed the final distance. He knelt slowly, placing himself lower than the bear's eye level, a posture of submission that contradicted every wildlife safety protocol, but felt instinctively right. The mother bear finished the honey, then turned her attention fully to Jackson. For a breathless moment, they simply regarded each other, man and bear, predator and prey by natural order, yet something else entirely in this extraordinary moment. Then, incredibly, she lowered her massive head. With trembling hands, Jackson reached out, placing the tracking collar around her thick neck. The device was designed to expand as needed, secure without constricting. The click of the locking mechanism seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed silence. "Thank you," Jackson whispered, overwhelmed by the significance of what had just occurred. The bear raised her head, shaking slightly as she adjusted to the collar's unfamiliar weight. She huffed once, then turned and ambled unhurriedly back toward the forest edge, where she settled once more, watching the cabin. The silence broke as Jenkins spoke into his radio, voice tight with disbelief. "Collar secured, without tranquilizer. I repeat, collar secured through voluntary cooperation." As Jackson walked back toward the cabin, he was met with expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. Eliza hurried to meet him, camera in hand, her professional composure momentarily abandoned. "That was—" she struggled for words. "I've never seen anything like it." "Never." Jenkins approached more cautiously. "Well, Miller, it appears you've upheld your end of the bargain. The enclosure meets specifications and the mother is collared." He handed Jackson an official-looking document. "Temporary permit for wildlife rehabilitation. 2 weeks as agreed. Dr. Sorensen will file the necessary reports." As the wildlife officials packed their equipment and the last volunteers departed, the property gradually quieted. The mother bear remained at her chosen spot, the new collar visible around her neck. Inside, the cub had awakened and was exploring the cabin with increasing strength, his wound healing remarkably well. "You should bring him outside," Eliza suggested as evening approached. "Let his mother see his progress up close." The reunification was another moment of wonder. Jackson carried the cub to the newly constructed enclosure, placing him gently on the soft earth. The mother bear approached immediately, pressing against the fencing as her cub wobbled toward her. Though separated by the mesh, they touched noses, communicating in soft huffs and grunts that needed no translation. "We'll leave the enclosure gate open during the day once he's stronger," Jackson said, watching the interaction with a lump in his throat. "Let her come and go as she chooses." Eliza nodded, filming the reunion. "This could change rehabilitation protocols nationwide, if mothers can remain involved while cubs recover." As darkness fell, Jackson found himself alone on the porch, watching as the mother bear settled against the exterior of the enclosure as close as possible to her cub who slept inside. The events of the day had been extraordinary by any measure. A wild bear allowing herself to be collared, a community rallying around her cub's recovery, officials bending rigid protocols in recognition of something unprecedented. Yet, what stayed with Jackson most powerfully was simpler, the feeling of purpose that had awakened within him. For 3 years he had existed rather than lived, defined by failure and loss. Now, watching the mother bear's unwavering dedication to her cub, he felt something shift in his understanding of his own grief. The stars emerged one by one as night deepened. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The cub's continued recovery, managing the research attention this case would inevitably attract, navigating his suddenly less isolated existence. But for now, in this moment, Jackson Miller felt something he had forgotten was possible: peace. The transformation in the cub's condition over the next 3 days was nothing short of remarkable. Each morning found him stronger, more playful, exploring his new outdoor enclosure with growing confidence. The wound had begun healing cleanly, fur already starting to grow back around the edges. Jackson maintained a careful log of his progress, documenting everything from weight gain to behavioral changes, while Eliza visited daily to provide professional oversight. The mother bear had established a routine, spending nights pressed against the exterior of the enclosure and days alternating between foraging nearby and returning to check on her cub. Her acceptance of the tracking collar seemed complete. She no longer shook her head or pawed at it. Data from the device confirmed she never wandered more than half a mile from the cabin, her movements forming a protective circle around her cub. Jackson found himself sleeping better than he had in years. The nightmares that had plagued him since Emma's death, screeching tires, breaking glass, screams, had receded, replaced by dreamless rest. During waking hours, he felt a clarity of purpose that had been absent for too long. His focus narrowed to the bear's well-being and recovery. The fourth night brought an unexpected cold front, temperatures dropping unseasonably as rain began to fall. Jackson added extra bedding to the cub's shelter and checked that the drainage system in the enclosure was functioning properly. Through the downpour, he could see the mother bear in her usual spot, seemingly unbothered by the weather. "You're tougher than I am," he told her through the rain. "I'd be seeking shelter." Around midnight, with the storm intensifying, Jackson was awakened by a strange sound, a distressed whimpering unlike the cub's usual vocalizations. Grabbing a flashlight, he hurried to the enclosure, heart pounding. The beam caught the cub in the corner of the enclosure, body rigid, limbs jerking in a seizure. Nearby, the mother bear paced frantically outside the fence, making urgent huffing sounds. "No, no, no," Jackson muttered, rushing to the cub's side. The little bear's temperature felt dangerously high, his small body burning with fever. The gunshot wound, which had been healing well, now appeared inflamed, angry red spreading from the edges. Jackson lifted the convulsing cub, wrapping him in a towel as he fumbled for his phone with his free hand. Eliza answered on the fourth ring, voice thick with sleep. "The cub's seizing," Jackson said without preamble. "Fever, inflammation around the wound. I think it's an infection flare-up." "I'm on my way," she replied immediately. "Keep him warm. Try to get fluids if the seizure stops. 20 minutes. Inside the cabin, Jackson laid the cub on the kitchen table, medical supplies already spread out. The seizure had subsided, but the little bear's breathing was labored, his eyes unfocused. Jackson administered antibiotics and fluids, hands steady despite the fear gripping his chest. Outside, the mother bear's distress was palpable. She had moved to the porch, pacing back and forth, occasionally rising on her hind legs to look through the windows. Her vocalizations had changed from huffing to a low, mournful sound that seemed to vibrate through the cabin walls. When Eliza arrived, soaked from the rain, her expression turned grave at the sight of the cub. "Septicemia," she diagnosed after examination. "The infections entered his bloodstream. We need stronger antibiotics, fluid support, and cooling measures." They worked side by side, professional focus overriding emotion. Jackson established an IV line while Eliza prepared medication doses. Outside, the mother bear continued her vigil, her distress a constant backdrop to their desperate efforts. By 3 in the morning, the cub's fever had risen further despite their interventions. His breathing grew increasingly labored, each inhale a visible struggle that twisted something in Jackson's chest. This wasn't supposed to happen, not now when recovery had seemed so certain. "We're losing him," Eliza said softly, her clinical detachment finally cracking. "The infection's too aggressive for his little body to fight." There must be something else we can try, Jackson insisted, voice rough with exhaustion and fear. Different antibiotics? Blood transfusion? Eliza shook her head. We don't have the facilities for a transfusion, and we're already using the strongest antibiotics available. Sometimes, she hesitated. Sometimes all we can do is make them comfortable. The words hit Jackson like physical blows. After everything, the mother bear's trust, the community's support, the cub's remarkable progress, to lose him now seemed a cruelty beyond bearing. I can't accept that, Jackson said, moving back to the cub's side. The little bear's eyes had closed, his breathing shallow and rapid. Hey, fighter, Jackson whispered, gently stroking the damp fur. Don't give up now. Your mama's waiting for you. As if summoned by his words, a tremendous crash shook the cabin. Jackson and Eliza turned in alarm to see the front door splintered inward, the massive form of the mother bear forcing her way inside. Rain dripped from her dark fur as she stood in the entryway, eyes fixed on her cub. Don't move, Eliza whispered, frozen in place. Any sudden movement might trigger aggression. But Jackson recognized something beyond fear in the mother bear's posture, a desperate determination that mirrored his own. Slowly he stepped aside, creating a path between mother and cub. She needs to see him, he said quietly. The mother bear approached the table with surprising gentleness, huffing softly as she nosed her dying cub. The little one responded weakly, a small paw lifting toward his mother's face. For several moments they communicated in ways humans could never fully understand, touches and sounds carrying meaning beyond words. Then the mother bear did something astonishing. She began grooming her cub, her tongue methodically cleaning his fur, particularly around the wound site. Jackson watched, transfixed, as she continued this process with singular focus. Bear saliva contains natural antibacterial compounds, Eliza whispered, clinical interest momentarily overriding fear. Some research suggests it can help prevent infection in wounds. Too late for prevention, Jackson replied grimly, watching the cub's labored breathing. For over an hour, the tableau remained unchanged, the mother bear tending her cub with unwavering attention, Jackson and Eliza maintaining a respectful distance while monitoring vital signs. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, rain giving way to the deep silence of a mountain night. Around 5 in the morning, the cub's condition deteriorated further. His breathing became irregular, with long pauses between gasps. The mother bear grew increasingly agitated, nosing him urgently, making soft sounds that needed no translation to convey their distress. Jackson, Eliza said gently, it might be time to consider letting go. He nodded mutely, throat too tight for words. They had done everything possible, fought with every tool and technique available. Sometimes it simply wasn't enough. A lesson Jackson had learned in the harshest possible way 3 years earlier. The cub's breathing faltered again, this time for so long that Jackson was certain it wouldn't resume. The mother bear released a sound unlike anything he had ever heard. Part growl, part moan, a primal expression of grief that seemed to fill the cabin. I'm sorry, Jackson whispered, tears blurring his vision. I'm so sorry. In that moment, something broke inside him, not just for this cub, but for Emma, for all the loss he had walled away rather than faced. The grief he had kept carefully contained for 3 years came rushing forward, overwhelming in its intensity. Jackson fell to his knees beside the table, one hand still resting on the cub's unmoving chest. Not again, he choked out. Please, not again. What happened next would later be debated by wildlife experts and medical professionals alike. The mother bear, seemingly responding to Jackson's breakdown, pressed closer to her cub. She began a rhythmic pressure against his chest with her muzzle, almost like CPR, though such behavior had never been documented in bears. Her movements were deliberate, interspersed with grooming and vocalizations. And then, impossibly, the cub gasped, a single, shuddering breath that expanded his small chest beneath Jackson's hand. "Eliza!" Jackson called, voice cracking. She was already moving forward, stethoscope ready. "Heart rate's faint but present," she confirmed, eyes wide with disbelief. "He's still with us." Through the remaining hours of darkness, they continued their vigil. The cub's condition remained critical, hovering at the threshold between life and death, but he continued breathing. The mother bear never left his side, alternating between grooming and the peculiar chest compressions that defied scientific explanation. As dawn broke, Martha arrived with fresh supplies, stopping short at the sight of the massive bear inside the cabin. "Good Lord above," she whispered, clutching the doorframe for support. "It's all right," Jackson assured her, though the situation was anything but normal. "She's helping." Martha's weathered face registered shock, then a sort of accepting wonder. "Well then," she said finally, setting down her bags. "I suppose we're all helping together." The morning brought no dramatic improvement, but neither did the cub's condition worsen further. His fever remained dangerously high, his breathing shallow, but he clung to life with a tenacity that seemed inherited from his mother. Eliza administered more antibiotics, her expression cautiously hopeful. "Animals can sometimes rally when human medicine has reached its limits," she told Jackson. "It's not something we can explain scientifically, but I've seen it before." By midday, word had spread through the community about the cub's crisis. People began arriving with food, supplies, and offers of assistance, though most kept a respectful distance when they learned of the mother bear's presence inside the cabin. Sheriff Bradley made a brief appearance, raising his eyebrows at the situation but offering only practical support. "Jenkins is going to have a conniption fit when he hears about this," he commented dryly. "A wild bear inside a residential structure violates about 15 regulations. She's saving her cub's life," Jackson replied simply. The sheriff nodded. "Some things matter more than regulations. Let me know if you need anything, Jackson." As afternoon faded toward evening, Martha insisted that Jackson rest. "You've been up for 36 hours straight," she scolded. "You'll be no good to anyone if you collapse." Reluctantly, Jackson retreated to the armchair in the corner, intending only to close his eyes for a moment. Exhaustion claimed him immediately, pulling him into a deep sleep filled with fragmented dreams. Emma laughing on a swing, the mother bear standing protective watch, a small paw reaching toward a human hand. He woke with a start several hours later to find the cabin dimly lit by a single lamp. Eliza dozed at the kitchen table, her head resting on folded arms. The mother bear remained beside her cub, seemingly untired despite the day's ordeal. Jackson rose quietly, checking the cub's condition. To his surprise, the little bear's breathing seemed easier, his temperature noticeably lower to the touch. "Eliza," he called softly, hope creeping into his voice for the first time in hours. She stirred, blinking away sleep as she joined him. "Temperature's down," she confirmed after examination. "Respiration improving. The antibiotics must finally be taking effect." But they both knew it wasn't just the medicine. Something extraordinary had happened in this cabin, something beyond veterinary science, beyond normal wildlife behavior. The mother bear's unwavering presence, her instinctive interventions, had been as crucial to her cub's survival as any medical treatment. Through the night, the cub's condition continued to improve, each hour bringing visible signs of recovery. By dawn, he was awake, weak but alert, responding to his mother's gentle nudges with feeble movements of his own. The crisis had passed. "It's a miracle," Martha declared when she arrived with breakfast, finding the cub conscious and the mother bear still calmly present in the cabin. "There's no other word for it." Jackson wasn't sure about miracles, but he knew they had witnessed something profound, a demonstration of maternal devotion that transcended species boundaries and defied scientific explanation. As morning light filtered through the windows, he found himself watching mother and cub with a sense of wonder that went beyond professional interest or compassion. "What happens now?" Martha asked, setting out coffee and muffins at a careful distance from the bears. "We continue treatment," Eliza replied, "but I think the worst has passed. Bears have remarkable healing abilities when given proper support." "I meant with her," Martha clarified, nodding toward the mother bear. "She's made herself quite at home." It was true. The massive predator had settled into the cabin with surprising adaptability, claiming the space near her cub as her territory while remaining tolerant of human presence. Such behavior contradicted everything known about wild bear interactions with humans. "We'll move them both back to the enclosure when he's stable enough," Jackson said. "For now, I think we're guests in their temporary den." The day passed in a calm routine of medical treatments, careful monitoring, and cautious coexistence. Visitors were limited to Martha and Eliza, though curious neighbors occasionally drove slowly past the cabin, hoping for a glimpse of the situation that had become the talk of the county. By evening, the cub was strong enough to take liquid nourishment and even attempted to stand, though his legs buckled immediately. The mother bear remained vigilant but relaxed, seemingly comfortable with the human she had allowed into her circle of trust. As darkness fell, Jackson found himself sitting on the floor near the bears, speaking softly to them both. "You're fighters, both of you, survivors against the odds." The mother bear watched him with those intelligent eyes, while the cub dozed fitfully beside her. "Thank you for trusting me," Jackson continued. The words meant as much for himself as for them. "I needed that more than you know." The night deepened around them, the cabin quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the soft breathing of its occupants. Jackson dozed off where he sat, physically and emotionally exhausted from the crisis. In his dreams, Emma came to him, not the broken child of his nightmares, but whole and vibrant, laughing as she had in life. "It's okay, Dad," she said clearly. "You can let me go now. I'm okay." He woke with tears on his face, the dream lingering with unusual clarity. The cabin was dark and still, moonlight filtering through the windows to illuminate the sleeping forms of the bears. The cub's breathing was steady now, his small body curled against his mother's massive form. For the first time in 3 years, Jackson allowed himself to fully face the truth he had been running from. Emma wasn't dead. She lived with her mother in Seattle, where Jackson had sent them after his breakdown following the accident. It had been easier to tell everyone she was gone, easier to retreat into isolation than to face his failure as a father, his inability to protect her from the trauma of the crash that had left her with scars both physical and emotional. He hadn't been able to bear seeing her injuries, knowing they were his fault. He had been driving. He had swerved too late. His ex-wife had taken Emma away at his request, agreeing to the separation he demanded in his grief-stricken state. And in the years since, the lie had become his reality, easier to bear than the truth of his abandonment. Looking at the mother bear now, who had risked everything for her cub, who had defied her very nature to seek help from humans, who had refused to leave even when hope seemed lost, Jackson felt the full weight of his cowardice. While he had hidden from his pain, this wild creature had embraced hers, transformed it into determined action. "I need to make this right," he whispered into the darkness. As if in response, the cub stirred, opening his eyes to look directly at Jackson. In that moment of connection, something shifted, a decision crystallizing into certainty. When this was over, when the bears were healed and returned to the wild, Jackson would face his own truth. He would reach out to Emma, not expecting forgiveness, but offering the apology and explanation she deserved. The night passed quietly, a peaceful contrast to the previous crisis. By morning, the cub's improvement was remarkable. He took food eagerly and managed several wobbly steps. The infection had been conquered, his resilient young body healing with the speed unique to wild creatures. Eliza arrived early, visibly relieved at the cub's progress. "He's out of danger," she confirmed after examination. "Bears have incredible recovery capabilities when the crisis point is passed." Martha followed shortly after, bringing breakfast and community news. "You're the talk of the county, Jackson Miller. The bear whisperer, they're calling you down at the diner." Jackson grimaced at the nickname. "I didn't do anything special. She's the one who saved him." He nodded toward the mother bear, who was watching them with her usual alert attention. "Maybe so," Martha replied, "but you're the one who gave them a chance when others wouldn't." "That counts for something in my book." As they spoke, the cub attempted another exploration of the cabin, stronger than the previous day but still unsteady. His curiosity seemed restored along with his health, a positive sign of recovery. The mother bear watched attentively, but made no move to restrict his movements, her trust in the cabin's safety apparently complete. "We should move them back to the enclosure tomorrow," Eliza suggested. "He's stable enough now, and it would be better for him to start readjusting to outdoor conditions." Jackson agreed, though the thought of the empty cabin afterwards produced an unexpected pang. These bears had transformed his space and him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The day passed peacefully, with the cub growing visibly stronger by the hour. By evening, he was able to maintain his balance for short periods, exploring more confidently under his mother's watchful eye. Jackson documented everything, maintaining the detailed logs that would eventually become part of wildlife research records. As darkness fell, Eliza departed with promises to return in the morning to help with the transfer back to the enclosure. Martha lingered longer, her concern now focused on Jackson rather than the bears. "What will you do after they're gone?" she asked directly, her age granting her the privilege of uncomfortable questions. Jackson considered his answer carefully. "Make some changes, long overdue ones." Martha studied him with knowing eyes. "Good. It's about time." She patted his hand before leaving. "You've been hiding too long, Jackson Miller. These bears brought you back to the land of the living. Don't waste that gift." Alone again with the bears, Jackson reflected on Martha's words. The events of the past days had indeed awakened something he had thought long dead: connection, purpose, hope. The mother bear's unwavering dedication to her cub had forced Jackson to confront his own failures, to recognize the courage he had lacked. "You're better parents than some humans," he told the mother bear softly. "Better than I was, certainly." As night deepened, the cub fell asleep curled against his mother, his breathing strong and regular, so different from the desperate gasps of the night before. The mother bear remained awake longer, her dark eyes occasionally meeting Jackson's in that strange, knowing way that defied explanation. Jackson settled into his armchair, exhaustion from the crisis still heavy in his bones. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, moving the bears, continuing their recovery, preparing for their eventual return to the wild. But for now, in this moment of shared peace, he allowed himself to feel something he had forgotten: gratitude. Not just for the cub's survival, but for the unexpected gift these wild creatures had brought him, the chance to face his truth and perhaps, finally, begin to heal. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the cabin windows, illuminating the extraordinary scene within: a wild black bear and her cub, sleeping peacefully on the living room floor of a human dwelling. Jackson had dozed in his armchair, waking occasionally throughout the night to check on the cub's condition. Each time he found the little bear resting comfortably, his breathing strong and regular. As Jackson prepared coffee, moving quietly to avoid disturbing the bears, he noticed something on the cub's neck, a glint of metal that hadn't been there before. Moving closer, he saw with astonishment that the mother bear had somehow managed to transfer her tracking collar to her cub. The device hung loosely around the little one's neck, clearly adjusted by careful teeth and claws to fit the smaller circumference. "You clever girl," Jackson whispered, amazed by the deliberate nature of the act. The mother bear opened her eyes at his voice, regarding him with that intelligent gaze that still unsettled him with its human-like awareness. Eliza arrived as promised, stopping short at the sight of the collar transfer. "That's remarkable," she said after examining the cub. "I've never seen anything like it. She must have worked at it for hours while we slept." "Why would she do it?" Jackson wondered aloud, watching as the mother bear groomed her cub, carefully avoiding the collar. "Perhaps she understands more than we think," Eliza suggested. "If the collar represents protection to her, official recognition by humans, she might be trying to extend that protection to her cub." The idea was both fascinating and unsettling. Just how much did this bear comprehend about human systems? How much had she observed and internalized during her interactions with people? Martha arrived with breakfast and additional supplies for moving the bears back to the enclosure. Sheriff Bradley accompanied her, his expression wavering between professional concern and personal fascination as he took in the scene. "Jenkins is on his way," he informed them after the initial greetings. "Got word about the mother bear being inside. He's not happy." "The cub nearly died," Jackson replied simply. "She saved him." Bradley nodded. "I know that, and you know that. But regulations don't account for miracle bears with human-like understanding." They prepared for the transfer carefully, Eliza readying a mild sedative in case the cub became stressed during the move. The mother bear watched their preparations with apparent comprehension, showing none of the agitation one would expect from a wild animal in such unusual circumstances. "I think she knows we're helping them back outside," Martha observed, unpacking the basket of food she'd brought. "Look at how calm she is." Jenkins arrived as they were finishing breakfast, his face tight with barely contained outrage. "Miller, this violates every protocol we established." "A wild bear inside a residential structure. Do you have any idea of the liability issues?" Before Jackson could respond, Martha stepped forward. "That bear saved her cub's life when your medicine couldn't, Harold Jenkins. Some things matter more than your protocols." Jenkins appeared momentarily taken aback by the elderly woman's directness. His gaze moved to the bears, lingering on the tracking collar now adorning the cub. "What happened to the mother's collar?" "She transferred it to her cub during the night," Eliza explained, her professional tone helping to diffuse the tension. "Manually adjusted it to fit. It's unprecedented behavior." Something in Jenkins's expression shifted, the bureaucrat momentarily overshadowed by the wildlife enthusiast. "She transferred it herself." "That's extraordinary," Eliza finished for him. "This entire case is extraordinary, Mr. Jenkins. These bears are rewriting what we understand about wildlife behavior and cognition." The wildlife official's rigid posture softened slightly. "The department will need comprehensive documentation, video evidence, written observations, medical records." "You'll have it all," Jackson promised. "Right now, we need to focus on getting them comfortably settled back in the enclosure." The transfer went more smoothly than anyone had anticipated. The mother bear seemed to understand the purpose, following Jackson to the enclosure with her cub walking unsteadily beside her. Though still weak from his ordeal, the little bear's determination to stay upright was evident in every wobbly step. Once inside the enclosure, the mother bear performed a thorough inspection, checking every corner before settling in the shaded area near the back. The cub explored more tentatively, still building strength but showing remarkable recovery from his near-death experience. "His progress is incredible," Eliza noted, filming the cub's movements for her documentation. "Medically speaking, he should still be critically ill, not walking around." Jenkins had remained to observe the transfer, his professional skepticism gradually giving way to genuine interest. "The research value of this case can't be overstated," he admitted. "I'll speak with the department about extending the rehabilitation period to gather more data." After the others had departed, Jackson remained by the enclosure, watching the bears settle into their outdoor home. The mother bear approached the fence where he stood, her massive head level with his chest. For a long moment they simply regarded each other, man and bear, connected by circumstance, and something deeper that defied easy categorization. "Thank you," Jackson said quietly, "for trusting me, for showing me what courage really looks like." The bear huffed softly, then turned back to her cub, who had curled up in the fresh straw bedding for a nap. The tracking collar glinted in the sunlight, a symbol of the extraordinary bond that had formed between these wild creatures and the humans who had helped them. Jackson returned to his cabin, struck by the emptiness after days of ursine occupation. Bare fur clung to the furniture, claw marks scored the wooden floor, and the lingering musky scent of wild animals permeated the space. Yet rather than feeling relieved by their departure, Jackson felt a curious hollowness, as if something vital had been removed from his life. He busied himself with cleaning, trying to ignore the emotion building in his chest. When the phone rang, he answered without checking the caller ID, expecting Eliza or Martha with follow-up questions about the bears. "Mr. Miller?" The female voice was unfamiliar, professional. "This is Angela Reeves from the Seattle Tribune. We've heard about your extraordinary interaction with the mother bear and her cub. Would you be willing to provide an interview?" Jackson's grip tightened on the phone. "How did you get this number?" "Public record, sir. Your story is generating significant interest. A man living alone in the mountains, saving a bear cub, while the mother bear actually enters his home." "No comment," Jackson interrupted, ending the call. But the phone rang again almost immediately. Another reporter, then another. Word had spread beyond the local community, catching the attention of media outlets hungry for heartwarming wildlife stories. By mid-afternoon, Jackson had stopped answering altogether, retreating to the porch where he could watch the bears in their enclosure and escape the persistent ringing. Eliza arrived with additional supplies, her expression apologetic. "The story's gone viral," she explained. "Someone posted video of the mother bear on your porch. Wildlife conservation groups are particularly interested. They're calling it unprecedented evidence of interspecies trust." Jackson groaned. "I don't want attention. I just wanted to help them." "I know." Eliza sat beside him on the porch steps. "But this case could change wildlife rehabilitation protocols nationwide. The documentation we're gathering might help other orphaned cubs stay with their mothers during recovery." Put that way, Jackson could understand the importance, but the public attention felt like an invasion of the private sanctuary he had carefully constructed. Moreover, increased scrutiny carried risks. What if someone looked deeper into his background, discovered the truth about Emma that he had concealed for years? As if reading his thoughts, Eliza added gently, "You don't have to be the public face of this, Jackson. I can handle the research documentation, work with Jenkins on the official reports. You can maintain your privacy." He nodded gratefully. "I'd appreciate that." The cub had awakened from his nap and was attempting to climb one of the structures within the enclosure, his strength visibly returning. The mother bear watched attentively, intervening only when he wobbled precariously at the top. "His recovery is remarkable," Eliza observed. "At this rate, they could be ready for release earlier than we anticipated." The thought produced an unexpected pang in Jackson's chest. "Good," he said. not entirely convincingly. That's the goal, after all. Eliza studied him with perceptive eyes. It's always hard, letting go of animals we've rehabilitated, especially ones with this level of connection. They're wild animals, Jackson stated firmly, as much to himself as to her. They belong in the forest, not in an enclosure or a cabin. True, but that doesn't make the separation any easier. As evening approached, Martha arrived with dinner and news from town. "The diners created a bear whisperer sandwich," she reported with amusement. "Turkey and honey on sourdough. Proceeds go to wildlife conservation." Jackson rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a small smile. "This town needs more excitement." "Oh, we've had plenty since you took in those bears," Martha countered. "Haven't seen the community come together like this in years." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else. Margaret Sullivan's organized a petition." "What kind of petition?" Jackson asked warily. "To have the bears relocated immediately. Claims they're a public safety risk, drawing more bears to the area." Martha's expression conveyed her opinion of this effort. "She's got about 15 signatures so far, mostly from that new development down by the lake." Jackson felt a surge of protectiveness. "Jenkins has already approved their stay for rehabilitation." "I know that, and most folks support what you're doing." "I'm just keeping you informed." Martha patted his hand. "Don't worry too much. Margaret's always needed something to crusade against." After Martha left, Jackson remained on the porch until darkness fell, watching the bears settle for the night. The cub had exhausted himself with his climbing exercises and now slept deeply, the mother bear curled protectively around him. The simple rightness of their relationship, the unquestioning devotion, the instinctive protection, highlighted the failures of his own parenting in painful clarity. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Sheriff Bradley, his expression more serious than usual. "We've got a problem, Jackson," he said without preamble. "Raymond Blackwood's being released today. Insufficient evidence to hold him on the more serious charges, so he's out on bail for the hunting violations." Jackson felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "You think he'll come back?" "His obsession with that bear hasn't gone away." "His lawyer claims he was suffering from PTSD related to his brother's death, that he wasn't thinking clearly." Bradley's skepticism was evident in his tone. "I've assigned extra patrols to this area, but I wanted to warn you personally. Keep your eyes open." The warning cast a shadow over what had been a morning of progress. The cub had awakened with even greater strength, managing to climb to the top of every structure in the enclosure. His wound was healing cleanly, the fur beginning to grow back around the edges. The tracking collar remained in place, seemingly accepted as part of his appearance now. Jackson increased his vigilance throughout the day, checking the forest edge frequently for any sign of Blackwood. The mother bear seemed to sense his unease, remaining unusually alert, her gaze often scanning the tree line. The connection between them had deepened to the point where they seemed to share awareness of potential threats. Eliza arrived in the afternoon with new supplies and a concerned expression. "I heard about Blackwood," she said as she examined the cub. "How worried should we be?" "Bradley's increased patrols, but—" Jackson shrugged. "Blackwood's had years to nurture this obsession. I don't think it will disappear overnight." "The bears are almost ready for relocation," Eliza noted. "We could expedite the process, move them to a more remote release site earlier than planned." Jackson considered the option. The cub's recovery had been remarkably swift, his strength returning more quickly than anyone had anticipated. Early release might be possible, though not without risks. "Let's give it a few more days," he decided. "Make sure the cub is truly strong enough for wild living. In the meantime, I'll keep watch." That evening, Martha brought not only dinner but a group of community members: Tom Whitaker, the contractor, Sarah Jensen with additional medical supplies, and several others who had helped build the enclosure. They had come to see the bear's progress for themselves and to offer support in light of Blackwood's release. "We've organized a watch rotation," Tom explained, handing Jackson a schedule. "Different folks taking shifts, keeping an eye on the property. Nobody bothers those bears without going through us first." Jackson was momentarily speechless, moved by the community's investment in the bears' welfare. For 3 years he had held these people at arm's length, rejecting their casseroles and invitations, retreating into isolation. Yet here they were, organizing protection for wild animals simply because he had shown them value. "Thank you," he managed finally. "All of you?" After the group departed, promising to begin the watch rotation immediately, Jackson sat on the porch steps, reflecting on the unexpected turn his life had taken. From isolated recluse to reluctant center of a community effort, all because a mother bear had chosen his doorstep as a place of refuge. The bears were settling for the night, the cub having exhausted himself with play. The mother watched Jackson through the enclosure fence, her gaze holding that uncanny intelligence that still sent shivers down his spine. On impulse he approached, speaking softly. "There are people watching out for you now," he told her. "Not just me. A whole community." She huffed softly, seeming to consider his words. Then, to Jackson's astonishment, she rose and approached the fence, close enough that he could feel her warm breath. Slowly, deliberately, she extended her massive paw through the mesh, holding it steady in the air between them. Jackson stared, frozen in place by the sheer unexpectedness of the gesture. Was this an invitation? A test? After a moment's hesitation, he slowly extended his own hand, palm upward, stopping just short of contact. The choice would be hers. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, with gentleness belying her enormous strength, the mother bear lowered her paw until it rested lightly on Jackson's hand, a brief, deliberate touch that sent electricity up his arm. Their eyes met through the fence, and in that moment, something passed between them that transcended the natural boundaries separating their species. The bear withdrew her paw and returned to her cub, settling beside him as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But Jackson remained rooted to the spot, his hand tingling where she had touched it, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Eventually, he retreated to the cabin, though sleep proved elusive. The mother bear's deliberate gesture, so clearly intentional, so unlike normal wild animal behavior, had shaken him profoundly. It suggested a level of intelligence and emotional capacity that challenged everything he thought he knew about wildlife. Dawn found Jackson on the porch, coffee in hand, watching as the forest emerged from darkness. The bears were already awake, the cub practicing his climbing skills with increasing confidence. Watching his playful exploration, Jackson felt a bittersweet pride. The little one was nearly ready to return to his natural habitat. Eliza arrived early, bringing equipment to conduct a final health assessment. "If his blood work is clear, we could schedule the relocation for tomorrow," she suggested as she prepared her instruments. "The sooner we get them away from potential threats, the better." Jackson nodded, though the thought of their imminent departure created a hollow feeling in his chest. "Where will they be released?" "There's a protected area about 40 miles north, deep forest, minimal human contact, good food sources. They'll have the best chance there." The assessment went smoothly, the cub tolerating the examination with surprising patience. Eliza drew blood samples, checked the healing wound, and tested muscle strength and reflexes. Throughout the process, the mother bear watched attentively but remained calm, her trust in Jackson extending to Eliza by association. "He's ready," Eliza confirmed after completing her tests. "His recovery is nothing short of miraculous." I'll make arrangements with wildlife for transport tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. So soon. Jackson nodded, not trusting his voice. The rational part of him knew this was the right course. The bears belonged in the wild, not in a man-made enclosure, however spacious. Yet another part, one he hardly recognized, rebelled against the impending separation. Martha arrived while Eliza was packing her equipment, her expression unusually serious. "There's been a sighting," she said without preamble. "Blackwood's truck, parked at the old logging road about 3 miles east. Tom spotted it during his watch shift this morning." Jackson's protective instincts flared immediately. Did Tom see Blackwood himself? "No, just the vehicle. Sheriff's been notified, but I thought you should know right away." The news cast a shadow over the day's progress. While the bears continued their normal activities, the cub growing stronger by the hour, the mother alternating between supervision and rest, Jackson found himself checking the forest edge frequently, tension coiled in his muscles. Sheriff Bradley arrived mid-afternoon, his expression confirming Jackson's concerns. "We found evidence of someone setting up in the woods," he reported, "hunting blind, similar to the one Blackwood used before." "No sign of Blackwood himself, but it's fresh. The bears are being relocated tomorrow," Jackson informed him. "Can you provide security until then?" Bradley nodded. "I've got deputies stationed around the perimeter. Nobody's getting close without us knowing." Despite these assurances, Jackson's unease persisted throughout the day. The mother bear seemed to share his vigilance, her attention frequently turning to the forest beyond the clearing, nostrils flaring as she tested the air. The connection between them had deepened to the point where they appeared to share awareness of potential threats. As evening approached, Eliza returned with the final arrangements. "Transport will arrive at 7 tomorrow morning," she explained. "We'll sedate the cub for the journey, minimal dose, just enough to prevent stress. The mother will follow the transport vehicle naturally if her cub is inside." Jackson listened to the practical details, a heaviness settling in his chest. "They'll be safer there," he acknowledged. "Away from Blackwood, away from human complications." "Yes," Eliza agreed, though her expression was sympathetic. "But that doesn't make goodbye any easier." After she left, Jackson remained by the enclosure, watching as twilight descended over the mountain. The cub had exhausted himself with play, and now slept against his mother's side, the tracking collar glinting in the fading light. The mother bear remained alert, her gaze periodically meeting Jackson's through the fence. "Tomorrow you'll be free," he told her softly. "Back where you belong." She huffed gently, a sound he had come to recognize as acknowledgement. In just days he had learned to read her vocalizations, her body language, the subtle shifts in her attention that conveyed meaning as clearly as words. The depth of communication they had established defied scientific explanation. As darkness settled over the mountain, Jackson retreated to the cabin, leaving the porch light on as a beacon in the night. Sleep came fitfully, his dreams filled with images of bears disappearing into endless forest, of reaching hands, finding only empty air. He woke before dawn, a sense of foreboding heavy in his chest. The first hints of daylight were just touching the eastern sky when Jackson stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand. The forest lay silent and still, mist curling between the trees like ghostly fingers. At the enclosure, the bears were already awake, the cub exploring while his mother watched from her usual spot. Jackson approached, speaking softly to them as had become his habit. "Big day today. You're going home." The mother bear rose at his voice, coming to the fence with that deliberate grace that still amazed him. She studied him through the mesh, dark eyes reflecting intelligence that transcended animal instinct. The cub joined her, pressing his small face against the fence, seemingly seeking contact. The sight twisted something in Jackson's chest, a complex emotion he couldn't fully name, These wild creatures had transformed his life in ways he was only beginning to understand, awakening parts of himself he had thought long dead. Their departure would leave a void he wasn't sure how to fill. He was so absorbed in this moment of connection that he almost missed the sound, a faint cracking of underbrush at the forest edge, almost, but not quite. Military training never fully faded. Some instincts remained hair-trigger sensitive even after years of disuse. Jackson turned slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, yet the silence now felt charged, unnatural. The mother bear had tensed as well, her massive head swinging toward the same section of forest, nostrils flaring as she tested the air. Then, a glint of metal among the trees, sunlight reflecting off a rifle barrel. "Blackwood," Jackson breathed, adrenaline surging through his system. He moved without conscious thought, positioning himself between the enclosure and the threat, making himself a human shield for the bears. "I see you, Blackwood," he called out, voice carrying across the clearing. "The sheriff's on his way." "It's over." Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Raymond Blackwood emerged from the trees, rifle held ready but not yet aimed. He looked thinner than before, his eyes holding a feverish intensity that sent warning signals through Jackson's mind. "It's not over until she pays for what she did," Blackwood replied, his voice eerily calm. "Step aside, Miller. This isn't about you." "Put the rifle down," Jackson commanded, hoping his voice carried more confidence than he felt. "You're violating your bail conditions." "Adding more charges won't help your case." Blackwood advanced several paces, close enough now that Jackson could see the tremor in his hands, the unnatural brightness of his gaze. "My brother died alone, terrified, torn apart by that beast you're protecting. Where's the justice in that?" Behind Jackson, the mother bear growled low in her throat, a warning vibration he felt rather than heard. The cub pressed against her side, sensing the danger without understanding its source. "Your brother was trapping and killing bear cubs," Jackson replied, keeping his voice steady. "She was protecting her young. Any mother would do the same." "She's just an animal." Blackwood's composure cracked slightly, his voice rising. "Animals don't get to kill humans without consequences. And humans don't get to execute animals for following their nature," Jackson countered. "It's over, Blackwood. There are deputies watching this property. You won't get away with this." For a moment, indecision flickered across Blackwood's face. Then his expression hardened, and he raised the rifle to his shoulder. "One shot. That's all I need. Move aside, Miller." Jackson remained planted in place, heart hammering against his ribs. "No." What happened next occurred with dreamlike slowness, each moment etched in crystalline clarity. Blackwood's finger tightening on the trigger, the mother bear's roar of defiance, the cub's frightened whimper, and somewhere in the distance, the wail of approaching sirens. The rifle crack split the morning air like thunder. Jackson braced for impact, for the searing pain of a bullet, but it never came. Instead, a strangled cry from Blackwood drew his attention. The hunter stood frozen, staring in disbelief at his rifle, now bent at an impossible angle. Sheriff Bradley stood behind him, service weapon drawn. "Drop what's left of it, Blackwood." "Hands where I can see them." Two deputies emerged from the forest, quickly subduing Blackwood, who seemed too shocked to resist. "She broke it," he kept muttering. "With her mind. She broke my gun." Jackson's knees felt suddenly weak. The bullet had gone wild, embedding itself in a tree well away from the enclosure. Only then did he notice what had disrupted Blackwood's aim, a large stone lying nearby, precisely the size and shape to have struck the rifle barrel with significant force. "Did you throw that?" Sheriff Bradley asked, nodding toward the stone as his deputies handcuffed Blackwood. Jackson shook his head, bewildered. "No, I was standing right here." Both men turned toward the enclosure, where the mother bear stood watching them, her posture alert but calm. At her feet lay a small pile of similar stones, gathered, Jackson realized with a shock, from the decorative border around the enclosure's water feature. "That's impossible," Bradley muttered, though his eyes told a different story. "Bears don't throw rocks." Yet the evidence suggested otherwise. Somehow the mother bear had not only gathered potential projectiles, but had utilized one with devastating accuracy at the critical moment, an act of tool use and targeted aggression that defied everything known about bear behavior. As Blackwood was led away, still muttering about supernatural bears, Jackson approached the enclosure in a daze. The mother bear met him at the fence, her dark eyes holding that uncanny intelligence that had unsettled him from the beginning. "You saved my life," he said quietly, the reality of what had just occurred still sinking in. "You protected me, just like I protected you." She huffed softly, a sound he had come to interpret as acknowledgement. Behind her, the cub watched curiously, unaware of how close they had come to tragedy. By the time Eliza arrived with the Wildlife Department transport vehicle, news of the morning's events had already spread through the community. A small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, wanting to witness the bear's departure and perhaps understand something of the extraordinary bond that had formed between man and beast. The mother bear allowed the wildlife technicians to sedate her cub with surprising cooperation, as if understanding the necessity of the procedure. The little bear was carefully placed in a special transport crate, monitoring equipment attached to ensure his safety during the journey. "The mother will follow naturally," Jenkins explained as they prepared for departure. "Her maternal instinct will keep her with the transport vehicle. We'll release them together at the new location." Jackson nodded, a lump forming in his throat as the reality of separation descended fully. These bears had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand, awakening compassion he had thought buried with his failures, demonstrating courage he had forgotten how to display. Before they closed the transport vehicle, Jackson approached for a final goodbye. The cub, drowsy from the mild sedative, blinked up at him with trusting eyes. Jackson gently stroked his head one last time, whispering words meant for no one else. "Be wild and free, little fighter. Stay with your mother. She knows what matters." Then he turned to the mother bear, who stood watching the proceedings with that uncanny awareness that still sent shivers down his spine. For a long moment they simply regarded each other, man and bear, connected by circumstance and something deeper that defied easy categorization. "Thank you," Jackson said simply, knowing words were inadequate for what had passed between them. The mother bear approached, pressing her massive head against the fence that separated them. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, she raised her paw and placed it against the wire mesh, holding it steady in clear invitation. Without hesitation, Jackson placed his palm against hers, separated only by the thin barrier of the fence. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement, a promise, a connection that transcended the natural boundaries of their species. Then she withdrew, turning toward the transport vehicle that held her cub, her purpose clear and unwavering. As the vehicles pulled away, Jackson watched until they disappeared around the bend, an emptiness expanding in his chest that felt both painful and somehow necessary. Martha appeared at his side, her weathered hand finding his. "They'll be all right," she said softly. "She's the most remarkable mother I've ever seen, bear or human." Jackson nodded, unable to speak past the emotion constricting his throat. The gathered community members approached slowly, offering quiet words of support or simply standing in respectful silence, sharing in the significance of the moment. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Jackson remained by the empty enclosure, his mind replaying the extraordinary events of the past days. The mother bear had sought him out specifically, trusted him against all natural instinct, protected him as he had protected her. Such behavior defied scientific explanation, challenging fundamental assumptions about wildlife cognition and emotion. But beyond the scientific implications lay something more personal, more profound. These bears had shown Jackson a path back to humanity, to connection, to purpose, to the courage required for facing hard truths. Their departure left a void, but also a direction forward. Turning toward the cabin, Jackson made a decision. It was time to make the call he had avoided for 3 years. Time to reach out to Emma, not expecting forgiveness, but offering the apology and explanation she deserved. Time to face the truth he had been running from since the accident. The bears had shown him what true courage looked like. Now it was his turn to demonstrate it. The cabin felt unnaturally quiet in the days following the bears' departure. Jackson found himself pausing at windows, expecting to see the mother bear's watchful presence, or startling at small sounds that might have been a cub's playful exploration. The emptiness left behind was physical, the abandoned enclosure visible from his porch, but also something deeper, an absence that resonated in unexpected moments. Martha visited daily, bringing food and companionship with equal determination. She never directly mentioned the bears, understanding intuitively that Jackson needed time to process their departure, but her steady presence provided an anchor as he navigated unfamiliar emotional territory. On the 3rd day, Eliza arrived with news. "They've settled well in the new location," she reported, spreading photographs across Jackson's kitchen table. Wildlife rangers spotted them yesterday, the cubs moving confidently, showing no signs of weakness from his injury. Jackson studied the images, slightly blurry shots taken from a distance, showing the distinctive mother bear with her white chest patch and the cub, still wearing the tracking collar, exploring their new territory. Something tight in his chest eased slightly at the visual confirmation of their well-being. "The collar's transmitting data regularly," Eliza continued. "They're establishing a territory about 20 miles from the release point. Good bear habitat, minimal human interference. She's an excellent provider, apparently teaching the cub hunting and foraging skills with remarkable patience." "She's an extraordinary mother," Jackson agreed, his voice rougher than he intended. Eliza hesitated, then added softly, "Jenkins says the case is revolutionizing our understanding of bear cognition and behavior. The documented interactions between you and the mother bear, particularly her apparent tool use during the Blackwood confrontation, challenge fundamental assumptions about wildlife intelligence." Jackson nodded absently, his thoughts still with the bears in their new home. The scientific implications seemed almost secondary to the personal transformation their brief presence had catalyzed. "And there's something else," Eliza said, pulling out a final photograph. "The rangers found this on a large rock near where the bears have been denning. They thought you should see it." The image showed a small arrangement of objects placed with deliberate care on a flat stone surface, several brightly colored fall leaves, a perfect pine cone, and a smooth river stone that caught the light in a way that suggested unusual mineral composition. The items formed a pattern too intentional to be random, too organized to be accidental. "A gift," Martha murmured, looking over Jackson's shoulder. "She left you a gift." "That's impossible," Jackson protested automatically, though his certainty wavered as he studied the image. "Bears don't create arrangements like this." "This bear does," Eliza replied simply. "The rangers are documenting everything, but they wanted you to know, whatever connection formed between you and this mother bear, it hasn't ended with separation." After Eliza departed, Jackson sat on his porch for hours, the photograph in his hand, mind grappling with implications that stretched beyond scientific understanding into something bordering on the mystical. The arrangement was undeniably intentional, objects collected and placed with purpose, a communication without words. That evening, as sunset painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Jackson made the call he had been both dreading and preparing for since the bear's departure. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed the number he still knew by heart, though he hadn't used it in 3 years. "Hello?" The woman's voice was instantly recognizable, sending a surge of complicated emotions through him. "Karen," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "It's Jackson." The silence that followed seemed endless, charged with 3 years of unspoken words and painful history. Jackson. His ex-wife's voice had cooled, protective caution replacing initial surprise. "This is unexpected." "I know." He took a deep breath. "I need to speak with Emma, if she's willing." Another long pause. "Why now? After all this time?" It was a fair question, one he had anticipated. "Because I've been a coward," he answered honestly. "Because I've been hiding from the truth, from my failures. Because she deserves better than what I've given her." Karen's sigh carried the weight of years of hurt and disappointment. "She's 13 now, Jackson, not the 10-year-old you last saw. She's had to grow up without a father because you couldn't face what happened." The truth of her words stung, but Jackson accepted the pain as deserved. "I know. I can't undo that. But I can stop making the same mistake going forward if she'll let me." "Hold on," Karen said, after a long moment. He heard muffled conversation, then the sound of the phone changing hands. "Dad?" Emma's voice, higher than he remembered, touched with the first hints of adolescence, sent a shockwave through him. "Is that really you?" "Hi, Emma." His voice cracked despite his best efforts. "Yes, it's me. How are you?" "I'm okay," she replied, her tone cautious, neither welcoming nor rejecting. "Mom said you wanted to talk to me." "I do." Jackson swallowed hard. "I've missed you, Emma. I've missed you every day." "Then why didn't you call?" The simple question held the honest directness of youth, cutting straight to the heart of his failure. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid to face what happened, afraid I'd hurt you more, afraid you'd hate me for the accident. I thought staying away was better somehow. I was wrong." "I never hated you," Emma said quietly. "I just didn't understand why you disappeared." The conversation that followed was halting, sometimes awkward, as they navigated the vast gulf of time and unspoken feelings that separated them. Jackson listened more than he spoke, hearing about Emma's life in Seattle, her friends, her school, her growing interest in wildlife photography. When she mentioned this last detail, he found an opening to share a carefully edited version of the bear story. "A mother bear actually brought her injured cub to you?" Emma's voice brightened with interest for the first time. "That's incredible. Did you take pictures?" "Not many good ones," Jackson replied, smiling despite the tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. "But a wildlife veterinarian documented everything." "I could send you copies if you'd like." "I'd love that," she said, and for a moment the years between them seemed to thin slightly. "Mom says I get my love of animals from you." They spoke for nearly an hour, gradually finding their way toward a tentative reconnection. Before they ended the call, Jackson gathered his courage for one final truth. "Emma, I want you to know something important. What happened, the accident, was not your fault. It was never your fault. I was driving. I made the mistake. And then I made an even bigger mistake by not being there for you afterwards." The silence that followed felt weighted with significance. "Mom said the same thing," Emma finally replied, "that it wasn't my fault. But sometimes I still wonder." "Don't," Jackson said firmly. "If you take nothing else from this conversation, please believe that. And know that I'm here now if you want me to be. No pressure, no expectations. Just here." After they said goodbye, with tentative plans for another call the following week, Jackson sat on the porch until the stars emerged, emotions washing through him in waves. Grief for the years lost, gratitude for the chance at reconnection, and a strange sense of peace that had been absent for too long. Martha found him there the next morning, coffee mug cold in his hands, eyes red but clear. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. "You called her," she stated rather than asked, settling beside him on the porch steps. Jackson nodded. "She's 13 now, interested in wildlife photography. Has her mother's laugh but my stubborn chin, apparently." Martha smiled, patting his hand. "First steps on a long road, but important ones. I'm proud of you, Jackson Miller." The days that followed took on a new rhythm as Jackson began the careful work of rebuilding his life. He cleaned the cabin thoroughly, repairing long-neglected maintenance issues. He resumed writing his book about military veterinary experiences, finding that the words flowed more easily now. Most significantly, he began making plans for a visit to Seattle. Not immediately, but in the coming months, when Emma indicated she might be ready. 2 weeks after the Bears' relocation, Jenkins arrived with an official-looking envelope. "Final documentation for your records," he explained, handing it over. "And a formal acknowledgement from the department regarding your contribution to wildlife research." Jackson accepted the envelope with a nod of thanks. "How are they doing?" Jenkins' professional demeanor softened slightly. "Thriving. The cub continues to develop normally, perhaps even ahead of typical milestones for his age. The mother remains an extraordinary parent. We're maintaining discreet observation for research purposes. And the collar? Still transmitting, providing valuable data on their movement patterns, denning preferences, foraging habits." Jenkins hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. The research team has documented additional instances of unusual behavior." Jackson raised an eyebrow in silent question. "Object arrangement," Jenkins clarified. "Similar to what was photographed earlier. Collections of items placed in what appear to be deliberate patterns. And—" He paused as if weighing professional caution against remarkable truth. "They seem to occur primarily after human observers have been in the area, almost like communication." After Jenkins departed, Jackson opened the envelope, finding official documentation of the rehabilitation case along with several high-quality photographs of the bears in their new habitat. In one image, the cub stood on his hind legs, reaching for berries on a high bush, the tracking collar still visible around his neck. In another, the mother bear gazed directly at the camera with that unsettling intelligence that Jackson remembered so well. That evening, Jackson sat at his desk and began writing a new chapter, not for his military veterinary memoir, but for a different book entirely. The words flowed easily, describing the extraordinary experience of a mother bear seeking human help, of interspecies communication transcending natural boundaries, of courage demonstrated in the most unexpected forms. When Emma called the following week, as they had arranged, Jackson found himself sharing his writing project with her. "It's not scientific exactly," he explained, "more like a personal account of something that science can't fully explain." "I want to read it," Emma said immediately. Maybe when I visit?" The tentative suggestion hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. "I'd like that," Jackson replied carefully. "Whenever you're ready." As October gave way to November, the mountains transformed with autumn colors. Jackson maintained his new routines, writing daily, speaking with Emma weekly, engaging more with the community that had rallied around him during the bear crisis. The hollow feeling left by the bear's departure never entirely disappeared, but it changed character, becoming less an absence and more a presence of a different kind, a connection that continued despite physical separation. On a crisp November morning, Jackson stepped onto his porch and stopped short, coffee mug halfway to his lips. There, arranged carefully on the top step, lay a collection of objects that hadn't been there the night before. Brilliant red maple leaves, a perfect pine cone, and a smooth river stone that caught the morning light in an almost luminous way. His heart pounding, Jackson scanned the forest edge, searching for any sign of the distinctive white-patched bear. The tree line remained still and empty, but fresh tracks in the soft earth told their own story, large paw prints leading to and from the porch steps. She had returned, if only briefly, traveled miles from her new territory, navigated back to the cabin, left her gift, and departed again. With trembling hands, Jackson gathered the items, bringing them inside to place on the mantel beside the framed photograph of Emma. The simple arrangement stood as testimony to something science couldn't fully explain, a connection between species that transcended natural boundaries, a communication without words that nonetheless spoke volumes. That afternoon, Jackson began making calls, to Eliza, to Sheriff Bradley, to Jenkins at Wildlife. By evening, a plan had taken shape, one that felt both right and necessary. The isolated cabin that had been his refuge from life would become something new, a wildlife rehabilitation center specializing in bears, with particular focus on maintaining maternal bonds during cub recovery. "Are you sure about this?" Martha asked when he shared his vision. "It's a big commitment." "I'm sure," Jackson replied, a certainty in his voice that had been absent for years. "She showed me what matters, Martha, what real courage looks like. The least I can do is carry that forward." As winter settled over the mountains, bringing the first dusting of snow, Jackson received a letter from Emma containing several of her wildlife photographs and news that she and her mother were planning a visit in the spring. The tentative reconnection they had established was strengthening gradually, one conversation at a time. The rehabilitation center plans progressed slowly but steadily, with support from both wildlife authorities and the local community. Jackson found himself increasingly integrated into the town he had avoided for years, discovering that connection to people, to purpose, to place was essential in ways he had forgotten. And every month, without fail, a small arrangement of natural objects would appear on his porch, leaves, stones, pine cones, arranged with deliberate care. Jackson never saw the mother bear leave these offerings, though the tracking data confirmed her brief visits to the area. The gifts remained their private communication, a connection maintained across distance and difference. On a cold December morning, as Jackson added wood to the stove, he caught sight of the framed photograph of Emma beside the latest arrangement from the mother bear. The juxtaposition struck him suddenly. 2 daughters, 1 human and 1 bear, both separated from him by circumstance and choice, both finding ways to reconnect despite the barriers between them. The parallel wasn't perfect, but the underlying truth resonated deeply. Both relationships required the same essential elements: courage to face painful truths, willingness to bridge divides, and faith that connection could endure despite separation. The mother bear had shown him the way forward through her example. Now he was following that path, step by careful step. Outside, snow began falling in large, gentle flakes, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. Jackson added another log to the fire, then settled at his desk to continue writing, not just the bear story now, but a letter to Emma, sharing hopes and plans for her spring visit. On the mantel, the stone from the mother bear's latest gift caught the firelight, glowing with an inner warmth that seemed to radiate throughout the cabin. Life had returned to the isolated mountain home, not the withdrawn existence of before, but something richer and more connected. Jackson Miller, once defined by loss and failure, was being redefined by something stronger. The courage to try again, to trust again, to love again, even knowing the risks these actions entailed. As he wrote the closing lines of his letter to Emma, Jackson thought of the mother bear, imagining her in her winter den with her growing cub, safe and thriving in their natural habitat. The distance between them was necessary and right, yet the connection remained unbroken, a bond formed in crisis that had transformed into something enduring and profound. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty room, words meant for ears that couldn't hear them, yet somehow knowing they would be received nonetheless, "for showing me the way home." Outside, snow continued falling, blanketing the world in pristine white, covering the old while creating space for new beginnings. Inside, warmth and purpose filled spaces long left cold and empty. And somewhere in the deep forest, a mother bear and her cub, prepared for winter, connected to this human dwelling by invisible threads of memory and meaning, a relationship that defied explanation yet existed nonetheless, powerful in its simple truth. The story of the crying mother bear and the man who saved her cub had already spread far beyond the small mountain community, touching hearts and challenging perceptions. But for Jackson Miller, it wasn't about fame or scientific breakthrough. It was about the private miracle of reconnection, the courage to begin again after devastating loss, and the extraordinary gift of trust given by a wild creature who had somehow seen in him the capacity for compassion he had forgotten he possessed. Spring would bring Emma's visit, summer would see the first phase of the rehabilitation center completed, and autumn would mark a full year since that fateful morning when a crying mother bear had dragged her dying cub to a stranger's door. The cycles of nature would continue, bringing growth and change, loss and renewal. And through it all, the connection would remain between man and bear, between father and daughter, between past wounds and future healing. In the quiet of his cabin, surrounded by tangible reminders of extraordinary events, Jackson felt something he had thought forever lost after Emma's accident. Hope, fragile but persistent, like the first green shoots emerging after winter's longest night. The mother bear had shown him that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite it. Now, step by step, he was learning to live that truth. Outside, the snow fell silently, erasing boundaries, connecting forest to clearing to cabin in a seamless white blanket. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, illuminating a space transformed by absence into presence, by loss into possibility. And somewhere in the deep winter forest, a mother bear perhaps dreamed of the strange human who had helped her cub when all seemed lost, a connection that transcended natural boundaries and spoke to something universal: the courage to trust, the power of compassion, and the enduring strength of a mother's love. In the quiet mountains where Jackson Miller retreated from life's deepest wounds, a mother bear's desperate act of trust changed everything. Her courage to seek help for her injured cub awakened something in Jackson that had been buried for years: the capacity to heal, to forgive himself, and to reconnect with his estranged daughter Emma. Like many of us in our golden years, Jackson had built walls around his heart, believing isolation was safer than risking more pain. But this extraordinary bear showed him that true courage isn't avoiding hurt, it's extending trust even when fear tells us not to. Her unexpected gifts, left on his porch months after their separation, remind us that meaningful connections transcend all boundaries. Perhaps you too have felt the weight of regret over relationships left unrepaired, opportunities not taken, or words left unsaid. It's never too late to reach out, to make that call, to leave your own arrangement of gifts at someone's doorstep. What relationship in your life deserves a second chance? When was the last time you took a risk that led to unexpected joy? Please share your stories of reconnection in the comments. Your journey might be the very light someone else needs today.